works.
Let's see. So
I'll take everything off.
The recording started by itself, which is good. We have that. Let's see. Now we got 10 participants. Now we got 11. Yeah, we're coming in. Let's see, attendees. There we got Anthony and Michael and Nelson, Sergio. Nice. I guess they keep this list in alphabetical order. All right. So yeah, we got some people coming in here. 20 people, not bad. We got Brad. All right, not bad, not bad. We're gonna give everybody like 5 minutes to jump in before we start. But we have the chat window here in Zoom that gives everybody an opportunity to talk as we're doing things. We've got the Q&A session there. I have another monitor, so when I turn my head, I'm looking at the other monitor. We'll use that for Q&A. So that's good. Do my best throughout the day. I guess that chat button is for individual. And I really appreciate everybody showing up because it's at the end of a long Dgraph day, which is just fun. Brilliant. 20, well, I guess 26 minus 4 is 23. 23, that's it. 24. Look at the number growing. This is brilliant. Hey, everybody. My name is Bill Kennedy. We're going to get started in about a few minutes. There's a lot I want to share with you over the next 4 hours. We will take breaks. We'll have a lot of fun. Definitely use that chat. We got Marco from Italy. Look at that. Brilliant. I'm going to turn that one off. All right. By the way, ETA on when the Ultimate Book is due to be published. Michael, do you have access to that link right now for the Google Doc? Because I actually have it out there and up there for you to actually be able to read right now and even help review and add comments. So if you're interested in seeing what's there right now, I'll figure out how to get a link in here. Hold on. Let me see, Mr. Book. Ultimate Go share. Look who showed up. Look at that.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, Manish. How's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
Good. Just copying a link for somebody here. Dude, I like the jacket, man. You're looking sharp. All right, Michael, I just dropped a link in the chat where you can actually, actually start reading the book now. I'm trying to finish testing, and I'm going to add some tooling stuff. So I think before the summer hits, we'll be in a position to be able to get a hard copy of it on Amazon print services. So that's kind of where we're going with that. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm going to mark this, I guess, as answer, type answer, answer live. Will it remain open? This book, Michael, is going to pretty much be free to anybody who can't afford the $10. I think I'm going to end up charging for the soft copy. We have a scholarship form that we always offer for everything that we do at Ardan. And so if there's anything that Ardan is doing and you just honestly can't afford it, you reach out to me and I give you access to a scholarship form, and I make sure my team gets you to a price point that works for you, up and fair. I mean, free too, if that ends up being, we have a lot of people in our community here who are from like Africa and other parts of the world where they just really don't have the same sort of income that we have, let's say, here in the States. And so we want at Ardan everybody have access to the materials, whether you can afford them or not. But if you can honestly afford it, then we ask to pay, because that's what supports our ability to continue to provide that material. So that Google document at some point will probably be replaced with something else, and then we'll have access to that book. So you'll have access to it one way or another. All right. Hopefully that
Bill, just quickly, when you share the comment in chats, please select both attendees and panelists. Otherwise, the rest of the room cannot see it.
I think I did that. Oh, no, I didn't do that because I set that setting on the other laptop. I didn't do it here. So thank you very, very, very much for reminding me that I didn't set it on my laptop. So that's better. All right, thank you for that. Always make a mistake with Zoom chat. Brilliant. It's 4:33. I was going to give everybody a couple more minutes. I'm sure Manish would like to say something to the 60. Wow, we got about almost 60 people here.
Well, definitely would love to welcome everyone. I think this is, we had a few workshops, but I'm just really excited about Bill's workshop just because it's such an engaging teacher. And now, Bill, looks like you actually have some extra hair to go with that. That's since when did that happen? That's
no, it's getting close. It's starting to look cool again in my life. You know, there it is.
well, I think maybe something good came out of COVID after all, huh?
Yeah, I guess I got my mom has been asking me for years to grow my hair back out because my dad always had his hair out. And I kept telling my mom, no, Mom, I got to be like Manish and look professional. And I can't do that. And then when COVID hit, I'm like, I guess I don't have to look professional anymore because I don't have to go anywhere.
We exchanged places. I used to have long hair before COVID, and you know, you grew hair after COVID. But yeah, really, I think it's going to be just an amazing, webinar. So please do learn, and I'll be around looking at the questions, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. I'm not sure if I'll be able to be here for the entire 4 hours, but I might just jump in and jump out. But I'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A to see how I can help.
Brilliant. Okay. So I appreciate you being here. All right, we're going to get going. It's 35 minutes after my local hour at 4 o'clock. Again, I appreciate everybody for being here. Okay, I was just looking on the chat for a second. Okay, let me set a couple of goals that I'm looking to accomplish in the next, really it will end up being about 3 hours of lesson because I'm going to give you 15-minute breaks every hour just to clear your head and do whatever personal things you need to do. So my goal on this webinar is to give you enough information on how to get a Dgraph service running and then be able to communicate and talk to that service. There's a couple of different ways we can do that. And I'm also going to be trying to leverage a mix of some Go code with any kind of queries that we're going to be executing. So we're going to really just kind of play with this as if we're just in a pair programming session. We're going to walk through all the different things. I'm going to create a repo that I'll share with everybody here, and I'll push code up to the repo as well. So you'll have access to everything I'm doing throughout the workshop. I don't want you to feel the need to have to like copy and paste or try to keep up with me while I'm typing. That's what the repo is going to be for, so we can continue to push stuff up and you'll have it. What I really want you to do is kind of sit back and look at the things that I'm doing. You'll have access to everything anyway. And then you have those questions. When I see those questions, I'll let you know I see them. We'll try to get those answered. And then hopefully by the end of this, if you're really interested in starting to play with Dgraph, you'll be in a position to be able to do that. That's my goal here. All right. So are we ready? Let's do it. Now, I'm going to, let's see, let's share my screen here. Okay, perfect. I can see that we're sharing the screen here. Let me, I'm just going to get my chat window up too over here. So I have chat and I have Q&A questions in case all this stuff is happening. Brilliant. And I can see what you see. What I want to do is start off by sharing some, by sharing some information. Oh, now I'm hitting every button that's wrong way. Let's try it again. By sharing some information on a project that I spent a good 4 months coding, and I keep up to date. So I was able to learn Dgraph and GraphQL, leveraging the Go programming language. Now this repo can be found right here in github.com, dgraph.io travel. Let me get that in our little chat window here. Let me bring up our chat window here. Perfect. And panelists and attendees, there we are. I'll do my best to let us see that. And you can see here that this repo is a repo that I've spent a good 4+ months on over the last maybe less than a year, I guess, almost a year. Really taking the time to learn how to build something in Dgraph. So a lot of what we're going to do today, I'm going to kind of talk about from this project and steal from this project. There's a nice wiki in this project that will help you get started with the project itself, getting started, the requirements, running the project, security like that. And what I want to do is build this out with you right now here locally, and you can walk through the steps with me if you want. You can go ahead and clone this project. We're using the licensing that we're using is Apache, so all of this code is available to you to use even in your own projects. And I won't get into project structures and things like that. I want to really focus on the Dgraph, GraphQL kind of side of things. But if you go ahead and you were to clone this project somewhere on disk, then you would basically be right here where I am right now. Now, a couple of things about kind of building and running this project. And I want to do that because there's a UI that I built. And when you see the UI, that's going to help us better kind of understand maybe some of the data models that we have here that we're going to learn how to put together and query and do all of that work. So in this project, one of the cool things that we have is I do have it, and Dgraph already natively kind of supports running in a Kubernetes environment. So one of the things we want to do, I wanted to make sure that we could do, was getting this to run in a Kubernetes environment and giving you the full access to how to do that with Dgraph. All right. So let's do the following here. If you go ahead and clone this project, or you're going to clone it later, and we have this video as well that you can walk through. One of the first things that we need to do is build the different services that we're going to have in this project. This particular project has essentially 2 services and an admin tool. We've got the travel UI service, which is a web service that helps to render the UI and then has all that support for talking to Dgraph directly. And then we have the travel API service that helps with custom Dgraph queries that we're going to be executing as well, that I'm going to share with you. So we're going to make these particular services into images, and then we'll be able to run everything. All of the configuration, and I'm going to steal some of this configuration when we get started, is under Zarf. You might be asking, Bill, what is this word Zarf all about? Zarf is one of my most favorite words. A Zarf is a sleeve that you put over a hot cup of coffee so you don't burn your hand. It's basically a way of protecting you when you hold that hot container. What a better name you can have for putting your containerization types of configurations for like Kubernetes and Docker and all that, right? Zarf, favorite word. All right, so again, I'm going to be copying and pasting things out of this into our new project as we go. But I just want to at least have you see this project so you can get a visualization of where we're going. So one of the first things you're going to do when you download the travel project is hit that make all. Make all is going to build those images out for us. Now, if I go and look at Docker images here, you're going to see a few things. You're going to see that I do have both Dgraph, and Dgraph standalone images. The Dgraph standalone image is what I use for running tests, and the Dgraph/Dgraph is what we are going to use in our Kubernetes environment. It's what you would use other than the master tag. Hopefully you would use a versioned, right? But we would have that for, I always work on master, so as there are new versions of this, I can let Dgraph know if there are problems. Okay. So we're going to be using those 2 containers to run Dgraph. I'm going to show you what we have to do that as well. But when I ran that make all, we essentially built the travel UI and the travel API. Now, I use a Kubernetes environment called kind. And so one of the next commands that I'm going to run here to get this project up and running is kind up. The wiki has information in it for installing kind on your machine. There's a front end tool called kind, and then there's an image that comes down. This is running Kubernetes in an image, basically. And I really love it because we can also use this to do other things, even if we wanted to do some maybe testing and things like that. So I really love kind. Now, it doesn't really matter how you're running your Kubernetes environment, but for this project, that's what I've chosen. So now that my Kubernetes environment is up and running, we're going to do a make kind load. That's going to take those images we just built, bring them into that Kubernetes environment. And then what we're going to be doing is a make kind services, and that's going to essentially now tell kube control the deployment that we're going to have and the services that we're going to have. Again, I'm going to copy and paste some of this stuff very soon so you can see exactly what we're doing to make this happen. And then we're going to have our kind status command, and we're going to see here that Dgraph is now up and running as a database. And very soon, when we have our travel service running. So it looks like at this point, we probably have everything running. One thing I can do to look at that is do my make kind logs, and I can see that there's some logging already on the services. Now, another thing you're going to need to do to run this project at your local desk is not also just go ahead and, let me move my chat window for a second. Under the requirements, as we said, you're going to need Docker, you're going to need static check. This is the big one. And I really wanted to try to avoid this, but I just couldn't. I wanted this project to work with real data. I didn't want this to be some toy project. And so the idea is really behind the data that we're going to be talking about today. And so I decided to use the Google Map APIs to pull information for this project. Now, the cool thing is it's a real API, and we get to use it, and you'll see how to use it. The bad thing is that we need a Google Map key. There's just no way around it. So one of the things you're going to have to do is to go into your Google account and get a key, and there's information here on how to navigate that. We also use this open weather key. I think that key is available to you because it doesn't cost me anything. But I can't expose my Google Map key because I'll end up having to pay a lot of money. So now that the project's up and running, what we need to do is create the database schema, and I'm going to seed it with some database. I'm going to seed it with some data. Sorry. Again, these are things I'm going to show you how to do. I'm just giving you kind of like an end result here. So one of the things that you're going to see me do here in this video is use the source command with a file called .keys. That has inside of it my Google Map key. So I'm kind of setting that up in an environmental variable. And now from there, I can say make seed. What's happening now is that we're creating our database schema. All of this is happening in GraphQL. So when I show you some of this code and we move it around and we write it, you'll get a better understanding of it. But I'm now hitting that Google Map API. I'm hitting two other APIs as well, some for weather, some for, you'll see in a second. And we're now loading the database up with some kind of seeded data. Brilliant. Here's the last step. This is the cool part, right? These services actually build a browser-based API. So if I say make browse, what we end up with is this little API. Now, I'm not a front-end developer, so you're seeing wireframes and things like that. But it's all good. It's all good, right? It's a very interactive kind of UI. And you can kind of see a little bit the graph that the schema is creating. This is why I wanted you to see this. And so the data that we're going to be playing with today starts out with this idea of a city. So we've got different cities that we can load into this graph. We're going to have Miami, we have New York, we have Sydney, we can add even more. And that city's got a name, a Latin long. And the idea is the city is associated with an advisory related to advisories that are happening in that city right now. We also are going to relate the idea of weather. So this is the current weather for Miami, and that's absolutely accurate. We've been running at about 82 degrees Fahrenheit all day. So that's accurate. This is actual live data here. Now, the other thing we did where we really needed the map was the idea of places. And we kind of categorized those places. So this is a set of the top like 20 supermarkets here in Miami. And so if I click on any of these little dots, we'll see the different supermarkets, at least the first 20 that we pulled out of the map API. This larger circle gives us the ability to see the list of supermarkets. We also have restaurants and we also have bars. And obviously we can add to this schema. And so what you're seeing here is our little kind of graph to be able to look at all of the different data that we're playing with and the relationships of that data. Another nice thing that the UI has that we're going to be talking about is this query tab. It's going to show you the GraphQL commands that we're going to be working with. And I'm going to share some of that with you as well here. So this gives you the ability to kind of also look at the queries that we're executing. And then we have the actual GraphQL schema. And this is something that we have to absolutely talk about here in this workshop. Now, a couple other things that this UI gives us the ability to do. We can add a new city on the fly. This is where we needed that API service to be able to do things like this. And also when it comes to different places, I've been working on support to be able to rate a place and then apply extra data for this particular user related to rating the place, 4-star, 5-star. I haven't finished the full development of that yet, but it's coming. And these are things, all these things that we can talk about. Okay, so you've seen basically where we're going, right? And we've got Google Maps in here too, with all the places that we've selected. So you kind of see where we're going, right? I mean, it took me a good 4 months just to get a lot of this code up and running because I had to learn how to think about the data that we're now working with, cities, advisories, weather, places. I had to think in terms of a graph database as opposed to thinking about this in terms of a SQL database, right? Or a NoSQL database. One of the things that I want to share with you is that if you're really starting out with a graph database, I think this is going to be a great workshop because what I'm going to try to do is give you my insights on how I think about graph databases now as it relates to my years of experience working with SQL and years of experience working with NoSQL. And I believe after months of doing this, that the graph database is kind of in that sweet spot where you're going to see we have a very structured data schema, right? It's structured. You're going to see that, which is great, right? We didn't get that necessarily from the NoSQL out of the box. I have a structured data set, but it's also very flexible and dynamic, much more than our relational databases. And if you just kind of draw out on paper what you're trying to the relationships that you're trying to graph, then it becomes easier to kind of bring it all together. I've had to do a lot of kind of work on paper to make me think about some of this stuff. And after a little bit, your brain will just start thinking about that graph and you'll actually be able to move faster and do things. At least I feel that way. So for me, any new projects that I'm working on, the idea of using that graph database is first and foremost in my head. And I'm working with clients today that are deciding to use Dgraph specifically as their general purpose database and kind of going away from the whole relational database models. How do you recommend representing ownership in a graph database? Let's keep that question out there right now. I can't answer that right now, but let's keep it out there and let's kind of continue to start to learn. I'm a teacher. What I do when I teach is I really like to lay foundations of material. So we know something and then we can add to it. We know something we can add to it. So let me get back to sharing where we're at here. I'm going to close down this app. I'm going to do a make kind down. And you now have, or at least I've shown you now how you can, once you clone this project, the different commands you can use to build and run it. Again, you got to install Docker, you got to install kind, you got to get your map key. And if you have trouble with that, you can always reach out to me after this workshop and I'll work with you on that. But it's a great project to kind of start from and a great project to pick apart. Okay, so one of the things that I want to do here is kind of break down certain aspects of this project so we can kind of lift the covers up a little bit. But before we do that, what I'm going to do, and I should have loaded this already and I didn't. I'm going to bring up my Lucid chart. If you've never played with Lucid chart before, it's like Visio on steroids on the web. And when I give these types of talks, I like using it because it gives me kind of a whiteboard to play with. And so that's what we're going to use here. So let's leverage this right now. I want to just talk a little bit also about kind of architecture and the way I think. And I think something that's very, very powerful about Dgraph's architecture for those of us who are just average developers trying to solve business problems day in and day out. We want to do that with integrity, but we also want to do that with a minimal kind of redundancy, right? So here's the cool thing. If we were building a traditional application today, what would we be thinking about, right? We would be thinking about that we need some sort of database, all right? And so our database, maybe it's sitting here, and whatever database we've chosen, maybe we've chosen some sort of maybe SQL database, right? Like a Postgres or something, and it sits here. And then we realize that we have a team of people whose job it is to build a bunch of kind of front end applications, right? Whether this is kind of browser based, or we're talking about applications that are mobile, right? I mean, we want to build these front ends. And traditionally, we've stayed away from these client applications, right? Our client applications talking to the database directly for endless reasons that we talk about. Mainly, we don't want to maybe stick DSL type of SQL code in here. We don't want to do that. So, or we want some, maybe we want some better scalability, whatever it is. Traditionally, what we've done is we've taken our client applications, we've taken our database, and we've kind of added this layer in between, right? And what I'll do is, this is our web service, right? And a majority of what our web service tends to have to do is CRUD. And this becomes, I can't tell you, how tedious is this? How tedious is it to build out the CRUD layers that just give you basic access to the database? It's a lot of work. And a lot of times, this development here can't even start until this web service work is done, because we're not going to let these client applications talk to the database directly. Most of these applications are very good talking HTTP, right? And maybe some other kind of client, those protocols, but talking Postgres or whatever that is, it's not really in the wheelhouse. It's another reason why we do this. And so there's a large development effort that has to take place here in the middle before any of this kind of work gets to happen. And it slows everything down. I can't tell you over the last 30 years how stressful it's been to always have to be ahead of the UI team, always ahead of those front end teams, right? And so one of the cool things, I think, one of the really cool things about Dgraph is Dgraph has kind of flipped this model around a little bit. And you're going to see it in the code that I've just shared with you. One of the things that Dgraph said was, you know what? Why does a database have to be in the bottom layer? Why can't the database be here? And potentially now, what we can do is build web service that need maybe custom, business logic. For me, one of the cool things that I wanted to really learn how this worked with Dgraph was moving the database from layer 3 to layer 2. Now, to do that, you need essentially a DSL, right? A domain-specific language that is native with these browser and mobile apps that will let you do that. And that DSL, for me, is GraphQL. I think this is where GraphQL is going to win. Because what GraphQL is going to do is give us that DSL that is easy to work with and use in that browser mobile environment. And let the browser and mobile environments be able to talk to the database directly. However, that's not enough, because we don't want to write queries necessarily, right? Like we think about queries today in the UI, we still want an API in the database. Somebody's got to build the API. I mean, that's what we were doing here. We were building an API for the client front end to be able to talk to the database. So if I'm going to move the database here, I still need an API. Well, guess what? Dgraph thought about that. Dgraph said, yes, we need an API. So what we're going to do is, based on the schema that is loaded in the database, we're going to create for free a GraphQL API that supports both querying and mutations. Essentially, our CRUD API is built for free and adjusted as the schema is adjusted. What does that mean? What that means now is, once we define our data model in that GraphQL schema, and we tell Dgraph, here is our data model, Dgraph generates the CRUD API for us, and now the front-end developers essentially get to go to work directly, immediately, leveraging the CRUD API. And I never have to write a CRUD API again. If I need in a service to talk to the database, I can do that because I can leverage what's already been given to me. How cool is this? This is saving me not hours, not days, potentially weeks, if not maybe months of code that I don't have to write and maintain and worry about over time. This to me is one of the really huge, big wins of Dgraph from an application point of view. This is why my clients are looking at Dgraph more and more every day. The fact that Dgraph is a scalable database that has those transactions, it's highly reliable, then they've run the database through their courses, that works in a Kubernetes environment, it is distributed, it can scale. The fact that we've got all of that, that's just, for me, bonus, just bonus, right? I mean, brilliant. I don't even have to think about or worry about scalability. One of the things I love about the cloud, is that you get all of that scalability for free if you leverage that cloud technology the right way. I'm a developer who doesn't want to manage production systems themselves. I want to use them. What's also really cool here is that Dgraph has a cloud environment now that they call Slash. So guess what? I don't even have to install my own Dgraph Kubernetes environment. I can connect to Slash, they monitor it, they manage it, and I have scalability out of the box with the database to do all of this. Essentially, I get to solve my business problem just about day one, and any custom logic that goes beyond basic CRUD, I get to put here. Here's the cool part. Are you ready? If, let's say I have some custom logic, like add a new city. Well, guess what? You might be thinking, Bill, we've got a problem now, because if you're writing custom APIs, then essentially what you're saying now is that the front ends have to know, do they talk to the database or do they talk to your service? Guess what? No, this would be a nightmare. If I had to worry about the front ends talking to multiple different services for different data, no, it doesn't work. So what Dgraph did, and I have all this working in the travel project, is they said, look, this same GraphQL API that we have here in the database, I'm going to give Bill the ability to write custom GraphQL queries. And eventually, very soon, custom GraphQL mutations, which means this browser app, this mobile app, only ever has to talk to the database. And we can configure the database to be told, if this GraphQL function is executed, okay, we're not going to handle it directly here in the database. We're going to send it to the web service and let the web service deal with it. And then it comes back through. This is brilliant. This is brilliant because now the database becomes layer 2. And then we customize the database. We get CRUD for free. We build custom functions that the database responds to. Also, by the way, Dgraph leveraging Node already has Lambda function support. So you don't even necessarily have to build your own web service logic. You could potentially do it if you're familiar with Node in their Lambda support. And if you're interested in doing something like federated GraphQL, like with Apollo, Dgraph already has plugin support because they've been working with some clients on it. And now you can even extend your GraphQL model where Dgraph is a part of that federation, and the plugins are there for free. If I sound excited, I am, because I think GraphQL as a DSL is the future for our data access. And I think what Dgraph has done by moving the database in layer 2 is that productivity gain that we weren't getting. I was able to build that project you saw really quickly. The only thing that was slowing me down was having to learn some of this new tech, right? Some of this new tech. That was the only thing. Now, I'm seeing some questions here. Is the database not in layer 3 for general security? How robust is the API? David, I'm going to show you both that API, and I'm going to show you some custom logic that comes out of the travel project. So then let's see if we can answer that question before the end of the workshop. What if I don't want to expose some data? Dgraph, and I'll show you some of it, has the ability for you to apply using JSON Web Tokens in some case, which we have applied in the travel project, the ability to restrict certain commands for certain users. I'll show you that. And they have coming as well, and I'm not sure if it's released yet. Manage can tell us. They're also going to have like ACL type of support, so you can really fine grain and configure in the database, okay, access to not just the GraphQL commands, but down to the field level. And I think Slash has some of this support coming out with UIs that let you configure it. See, if you Slash, you almost have little work to do on the admin side too, because all this security and stuff that you're talking about, they've been working on it and it's all there. And if you can see a demo on Slash, especially around security, you'll see that you can actually tweak it down to those fields. Manish, if I'm saying anything wrong, please jump in. But I've seen some demos with this stuff already, and it's pretty cool. Manish, why don't you jump in real quick and just talk about the security stuff that you've added to the database if you're there. All right, you must be busy. That's fair. But all this stuff is there. I'm going to be able to show you some of it because I've got some of it coded right now, and I'm waiting for some new releases to be able to do more. Okay, if I sound excited, yeah, I am. Does Dgraph provide an interface to create that custom business logic web service? And is that what Lambda is? So yes, I'm going to show you a custom function. I'm going to show you how we can do it. And no, Lambda is different. Lambda is the ability for Dgraph itself to go out and execute, let's say, that Lambda function and say that node. You could choose one or the other. I'm not a node person, so I haven't played with that tech yet. I built my own services to do it. ACL itself can be embedded into the graph itself with user as a node and control agent as edge. That's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer that completely, but if Manish gets back online at some point, I'm going to let him answer some of those questions. The support is there. I just don't remember all the mechanics around it, so I apologize. But the support is there. Okay, let's get going because I really want to, now that we've talked about this, and you're getting a general sense of what we're going to do here. I want to really start showing you some of the code that we have here, because that code that ran is essentially supporting all these things that I shared with you. Okay, but everything really starts from beginning to end with a schema. So if we don't have a schema, then we really don't have anything, okay? Now, I'm going to do a couple of things here. I want to navigate through this project so you, everyone that's here, can become more familiar with the project. My goal is that you should be able to clone and run this and then cherry pick and play with it. And if you're looking for open source projects where you want to learn about Dgraph and GraphQL and Go, this is a great project to work with me on because there are things here that I want to continue to do. Sometimes I don't have time, and then there'd be opportunities for us to work together. Now, there's another tool that I use to help work with the database. It's this tool called Insomnia. And I highly recommend that if anybody's going to be working with Dgraph and any sort of GraphQL, that you download Insomnia. It is free. It's free to use. And you can see here that we can create these kind of different access points to the data. So this Dgraph one is one that I work with while I'm working on the project. I set up one called Workshop that we can kind of play with here. And I'm going to talk about this stuff in a second, okay? But you might see me doing some things in Insomnia, so I can just kind of take the go out of it for a minute and then be able to just execute raw GraphQL. So I highly recommend that you download this Insomnia. If you have problems with it, again, you always reach out to me. Always reach out to me. I'll make sure that you have my email address before we're done. Okay, let's do the following. Let's get back into the project. And let's take a look at the schema that we have for this project. And let's kind of think about what I've done here with the schema and the different aspects of it, so we can kind of break it down and you can understand what we're doing. Now, you're going to find the schema in this project. You're looking at so actually, that's a great, if that's a GraphQL client, well, we can talk about that too. I did write my own GraphQL client, primarily because I wanted to learn what's involved in it. And so I see that we're in dark mode now. This is nice. So under github.com Ardan Labs GraphQL, you're going to see a very simple, very basic GraphQL client that not only this project uses, but some of the clients that Ardan Labs uses as well. I'm always about minimizing, reducing, and simplifying everything that I do. So if you're looking for a GraphQL client that's really simple and works, this is a project that you can work with as well. So we're going to be using that. But what's nice about Dgraph is they've gone out of their way to make sure that they work with all the different GraphQL clients that are out there. So if you have a favorite GraphQL client already in whatever language you're using, it's probably already been tested and works with Dgraph. They've been very focused on that. Okay. So under the business layer, you're going to see a data layer. And under the data layer, you're going to see a schema. Now, the schema package here in Go in this project is what's basically managing the creation of that schema against the database. But you're going to see a GraphQL folder, and you're going to see a schema.graphql file. And I've taken the schema and I've kind of put it in its own file so it's easier to manage. What's nice is that in Go 1.16, we now have the ability to have the compiler bring in this file at compile time. So it makes it really easy to have these kind of separate files and make sure that they do get embedded in the binary at compile time. So I want to talk about this schema, and then I want to show you two different ways that we could actually get the schema loaded in Dgraph. So let's start here with this city type. What I loved about GraphQL when I was first learning it is that it felt like I was programming, right? Like the idea of a type and a type having a name is very familiar to me. And I'm sure it's also very, very familiar to you. And so if you remember our data model, right? You remember our data model, what did we have? In the center of it all, we had a city. Now, that city has a name, it had a lat, and it had a long because we needed that for some of the mapping APIs. But you can see that this type has a few extra fields to find and in a certain way. And I kind of want to break this down. Once I share this with you, I think if you've worked with other databases before, it's going to be obvious. This ID field is really an important field because this ID field of this type ID represents a unique ID for this node of data when we're going to create a new city. And if you have this ID field as part of your type, then the Dgraph system knows to create a CRUD API for you for free. So it's this ID field that will be the marker for generating a CRUD API for city. So we'll have an add, we'll have an update, we'll have a delete, and we'll have the ability to query the city by this unique ID as well. And underneath the covers, you know, this ID is also highly optimized for search. So if we're going to search for a city by its ID, it'll be really, really efficient. Now, you see the exclamation point. That essentially means that this data is mandatory. It's mandatory. All right, so we're saying that you can't have a city node unless it has an ID field. In fact, we're also saying that the name field, which is of type string, is also mandatory. In fact, all of these fields are mandatory, right? If we try to construct a city node without these 4 pieces of information, then that's going to fail. Now, the other thing that we can do is apply also like searching indexes to other fields. What you see me doing here is applying a search index by, in this case, this hash. There's different indexes types that you can create. I'll show you that when we look at a schema. But I'm going to get back to some of this in a little bit. But we can create different indexes by search, and we can search exactly. We can search kind of on a regular expression. There's a whole bunch of things that I'm going to show you. Now, as I said to you, a city has inside of it a advisory. We saw that data. It has places and it has weather. And so there's nothing that special about these types, right? Other than the fact that I've applied an ID, so we'll get the full CRUD API. And based on the data or the API I'm using to get the weather, I know what all this is. I know what all this is going to be. Look at the place. The place has a couple of interesting other indexes. If you've noticed here, I placed a index to search on the name by full text. So that's going to give me the ability to search for places in kind of unique ways, right? But when it comes to the category, I placed an index for search by exact. So the only way that search is going to match is if I have an exact search on category. So these are some of the other types that we can have here. Now, if we take a look at advisory, I didn't do anything special there. But let's go back to the city. If you notice, I'm saying that the city is also associated with an advisory, and it's associated with weather. We're using the new types and we're binding them in, right? If you, again, feels very much like programming, doesn't it? And the other thing you see here is this has inverse. So what does the has inverse mean? Well, let's take a look at advisory since we're right here. You will notice that every one of these types has a city field. And then you will notice that we say has inverse field city. What is that doing? That's creating an inverse relationship in the data. In other words, what we'll be able to do is if I have an advisory node, I'll be able to then query the city. It will give me the link back to the city. And now I have this inverse relationship where I can go from a city to an advisory, and then I go from an advisory back to a city. And you can see that the field names are matching here. So if you need that relationship, that's not just one direction, city to advisory, but you might be doing queries, let's say on an advisory, and you want to be able to get back to the city data, then that's what we're going to be able to do. That gives us that. Now, what's also different here, if you see that we can store a city value in here. Now, you have the option to go with a kind of like a NoSQL database where each advisory could have its own copy of the city. You could do that. You may have a business problem where you really want a snapshot of the city related to this advisory. You can do that. But the one thing that Dgraph does, which I thought was brilliant, I'm going to show you how to do it, is that we could create a single advisory node, a single city node, and actually link the city to this as well. And we can do that also at the time that we're constructing the advisory data. So this could represent, right? I could have a bunch of advisories, let's say in the same city, where every advisory is sharing that one city node, Or it could also decide that every advisory has its own copy of the city. We can do both things here. This was something I don't remember that I was able to do, at least back in the day with Mongo and my NoSQL databases. And if you wanted to do something like this in a relational database, then we would need another table that created the relationship of city ID to advisory ID, right? This is why I love this graph database. Think about it. If this was a relational database and we had this maybe one to many or many to many, we would need another table to build those IDs out, and then we'd have all these extra queries and joins. Here, that goes away. When we add the city to the advisory, we can choose a city of a certain ID and have it linked. Or again, we can create a new city and then I would say kind of use our value semantics. We have our pointer semantics and our value semantics here. We get to do that. But if you look at the type system, it just says city, and we can represent whatever city we want there. So when you look at this, it's really, really cool. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of go back on maybe in our Lucid chart. I always tell everybody that I'm working with on the data modeling side, let's just draw some circles and lines and see what the relationships are between the data. And then we can define these types and the relationships, right? These are creating those relationships here by connecting them through these fields. And you can see here that a city has a collection of places. You can see the array syntax there. So a city has places, which is many places, and the place also has an inverse. So once again, we can inverse back over to that place. Okay, very, very cool. Now, here is a part of our type system. Before I go any deeper into other things, let's do the following. Let's get a Dgraph service up and running, and let's just try to construct the schema a little bit, and then play a little bit with some of the CRUD commands that we get for free so you can kind of see what's happening here. So one of the things I've done in the project, if you go to the make file, I love make files, is all the commands to run this locally within Docker Compose. You have all the support to run this within Kubernetes. You also have support to run it in Slash, Dgraph's cloud environment. All this support is there. You can cherry pick what you need. And if you want to just even run it locally, you absolutely can do that too. You have all this support depending on what you want. But since Dgraph runs as a container, what we need is the ability to run the database. Hold on. Now, I do have a command called db only. I have to find it. Where is it? Oh, I went by it. db only. The db only command lets us run the database in Docker Compose so we can play with it directly on our machine without having to go through a whole Kubernetes environment. Let's go back to Zarf and let's go back to Compose. When you look there, you'll see the db only config and the db only YAML. All right. So the db only config is setting certain Dgraph environmental variables. All right. You can basically copy and paste this and it will work. I got this configuration from Dgraph engineers. They helped me with this. So you can see that there's going to be a 0 running and an alpha running. Think of 0 as the manager, okay, at a high level. 0 is managing all of the communication through the database. It knows where the data is and it knows how to get to it all. And then think of the alphas as managing the data. Somebody say something? Oh, okay. As kind of managing that data. And again, running at scale, that data can be sharded and managed and accessed. So we're going to run a 0, we're going to run an alpha. You can kind of see some of the information there. And then on the compose side, essentially, we're going to run our Dgraph 0. We're giving it the Dgraph master image. We're going to run the alpha, and then that configuration comes in. All right. So absolutely, I want you to steal this information here. You can steal anything out of here, depending on the environment you want to run in. But this is going to give us the ability to now run our dgraph service. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to do a make db only. Oops, was it no dash? No, I don't remember. Yeah, no dash. All right. And what that's going to do is launch a version of dgraph locally on our machine that we can play with. All right. If I do our Docker PS, there it is. And you can see the different ports. The GraphQL endpoint is going to be running on that 8080. And that's how we're going to be accessing it. In fact, now that the database is up, let's go into Insomnia. Let's go into our workshop collection. And one of the things you're going to see here is I've already kind of set ourselves up to create a schema. Now, I'm going to make this larger for us for a second. Now, if we go back into the Go project for a second, sorry. Let's go back into the Go project. Again, I'm trying to map where everything is so you can come back and play with this. If I go into the schema package and I go into schema.go, you will see a method called create. And you can see the GraphQL command that we're going to use to update the schema. All right, so this is the command that I have to run with the schema that we're going to update. Again, what's nice about Insomnia is that I can take that same mutation command and execute it here. Now, one thing I want you to notice is right in here. To create a schema, we're going to use the 8080 port, but we're not going to use /GraphQL. We're going to use /admin. This endpoint is going to be for admin related activity like creating a schema. You might see also in the code the use of 3 quotes. We kind of use that to set quotes around a whole bunch of text. And so the reason this is able to work is I'm going to say that everything from here to here is basically a string and it will be managed that way. And so what we're going to do here is execute this mutation, update GraphQL schema, and then we're going to give it the type information that we have here. In this particular case, what I'm showing you right now is just city. All right. But why don't we do the following too then? Why don't we take city, and maybe what we'll do is take weather. Let's bring weather in as well. All right. And then I should be able to come in here as well. We'll take some of the weather information. Maybe we'll just do something like this aspect of it. All right, cool. And at least we'll have some of that to play with, all right? So we're gonna have an ID when we create the weather. We're gonna bind it to a city, that's mandatory. We're gonna have a city name, we'll have a description. Notice the weather isn't mandatory, so we can create the city first. And then when we create the weather, we'll be able to bind it to the city. I'm gonna show you that. Okay, I'm gonna show you that. Now, if this environment is working, right, I should be able to hit send up here. And as you can see, the schema did get created. This is good. The schema did get created. So we now have that in place. Now, one of the things I want to be able to see is the GraphQL schema in full. When I was playing with this again yesterday, and I said show documentation, I wasn't seeing what I wanted to see here. So that was like really weird to me. I did remember that working, but it wasn't yesterday. I've got another way that we can look at it. But this admin command right here, get QL schema, if I send that, it should also get us the schema information, which again, it's not giving me the API. So I think what I want to do is the following. We're almost about an hour in. So what I'm going to do is we're going to take our first break. And then when we get back, we're going to going to show you another application that can get us that schema that I want. And then we'll be able to look at the API that was constructed from that call. All right. So let me get out of sharing mode for a second. So we're going to take our very first 10-minute break. And let me put let's do this. I'm going to put well, then I got to share the screen, so I don't want to do that. All right, I'm going to take our first 10-minute break. And then when we get back, we'll continue moving forward. I'm going to try to answer these. I'm seeing some more questions here. Hold on. Are the slash servers located? We only need these services located in the Europe Union. The slash servers are located in data centers that are being put together by Dgraph. And I think right now they're only in the US, but when Manish comes back, we'll try to get you more answers on that. I wish the GraphQL client's data model was more visual to present to business and allow to switch code from DB easily. I see that. ID field, I had to ask a question in the earlier session. Can I make the ID field a unique hash of a UID? You can have your own unique IDs if you want, but that's going to limit some capabilities like on the generation of the CRUD APIs as far as I know. But you can always have your own unique ID and then apply an index to that. While we have Manish here, Manish. Yep.
Hey Bill, sorry, I was away, and I can't see the Q&A because I got disconnected from Zoom. So if you just tell me what the questions are, I'm happy to answer.
A couple questions that I couldn't answer. One of them was I was telling everybody how, and I'm going to show them how we have with the use of JSON Web Tokens the ability to apply restrictions on the queries or mutations somebody can execute.
Yep.
But you had just done a presentation recently where in Slash, you were even able to get it down to the field level. Is that right? Maybe you can just briefly talk about that support that's coming in Slash.
Yeah, so in Dgraph Cloud, we have a cloud level auth as well, which is on top of the Dgraph level auth, and the Dgraph level auth, which is GraphQL. So the Dgraph has two different kinds of auth. One is the access control list, which work at the predicate level, and then one is the GraphQL, which is RBAC, works at the object level. So you can mix and match the access control list and the RBAC stuff at the GraphQL and the DQL level, but then you can also use a much simpler sort of like cloud level auth, which can restrict access to certain endpoints that we have generated for you or other endpoints that we have, whether it's /admin, whether it is the query or other stuff. So there's like almost like two layers of auth that we have. One is in the cloud and one is within Dgraph. And within Dgraph, we have two different auth systems. One is ACL and one is RBAC. Hope that helps.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Another question that was asked before we take our break here. Well, somebody asked me why I like Insomnia. The other tool that I was using prior to Insomnia was the GraphQL Playground. Now, I'm bringing that back into our session here because that tool is really good at showing me the full schema that's generated by Dgraph. Insomnia is not giving me that full schema, which is odd to me. So maybe
Insomnia has documentation as well. In fact, I think I was using Insomnia for my keynote demo.
But it's not showing me it's not showing it to me right now for some reason. So I don't know.
There's actually a very small link which says schema on the top right in the middle. I
see the schema with the tool.
Yeah. And doesn't show.
I see this.
Yeah, the schema thing. If you click on it.
Yeah, but it's not.
And it show documentation.
I created these two types, city and weather.
Yeah, so if you query, then it should show you these, no?
It's not, but when I open up the GraphQL Playground.
Oh yeah, right. So the way Insomnia works is you had to stop, you have to rerun it. You have to stop it, run it again, then it can do it. Or maybe click on refresh schema.
Yeah, I tried that too.
The schema if you refresh. But better would be just to close it and run it again.
Okay.
It's not the most,
For some reason that's a bummer, right? Because I really like the tool over the Playground tool.
True, me too, yeah.
because what's nice about Insomnia is I can execute GraphQL or raw commands to dgraph like I'm doing in some cases. Let me see if that helps. No, I don't know
No,
what's
still
going on.
doesn't help.
It's weird. It's okay. It's all good. I'm going to continue to work with, I'll work with the GraphQL playground to show everybody that in a second. I'll copy and paste this out when we get back from our break. It's all good. All right, next quick question before we take a break. Where are your / servers located? You're building that out now in the US, right? Is there, he needs them in the European Union.
Right. So yeah, so they need it. So I think so we have basically / GraphQL is basically coming under the umbrella of Dgraph Cloud, and what we used to refer to as / GraphQL are essentially shared instances of Dgraph. And so for the shared instances of Dgraph and the free instances of Dgraph, there will be in I think 3 or 4 different regions around the world. One is in US West, one is in Europe, and I think one is in Asia Pacific. For the dedicated instances of Dgraph, they would be we're gonna like as you will see tomorrow when we launch, they would be in many regions around the world. In fact, we're planning to be in all the regions that we can support in AWS, in Azure, in GCP. So for dedicated instances, you can choose where you want to run them. All
right, perfect. Somebody is saying, I wish the GraphQL client data models were more visual to present to business and allow to switch to code from DB easily. Talking about something like arrows.app, make it more whiteboard.
So arrows.app, I think that's like the Neo4j thing. Somebody else asked me that in the previous workshop. We don't support that, but also, I mean, GraphQL is a big ecosystem. So I think if there is something like that exists, which exists for GraphQL, it should work just as well for Dgraph. Now, one thing that we are doing in Dgraph Cloud is to introduce a much better data visualizer, which will allow people to play with the data that they have loaded into Dgraph and to be able to derive queries based upon what you are seeing and stuff like that. I think that should help in a sort of business context when you want to like quickly showcase your data points without having to run queries yourself. It would be very visual.
All right. The other question is, can I have my own ID field that's like based on a UUID or something else? And I said, yeah, you can. You don't have to use the ID type. But if they don't use the ID type, you're not going to generate that CRUD API, right? That's my understanding.
I think in the latest changes, if I remember correctly from another GraphQL presentation, is that you can have multiple @IDs, and so it would run the index on that. Of course, you can also just like run a normal index, like equality search index on the particular UUID field and still be able to find things with that same UUID. I mean, it won't be maybe not as nice as the ID, but it'll be very close, and so it will get you there.
And your IDs are absolutely, I mean, they're guaranteed to be unique even across your distributed database. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
From my perspective, I would have that Dgraph ID probably, and then I could create my own custom ID for those things that I need to do.
Yeah, and you can just treat them like equality search, or a hash index or whatever. So, you can put anything for equality search.
Like I did with the category type, where I just said it's an exact kind of, when we go back here. So, sorry, something like that, and just say it's exact, and then you would be fine.
Exactly.
Okay. The last question is, I don't understand it, so maybe you understand it. Would GraphQL be integrated on the web service /resolver level?
Web service /resolver level.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Is it related to Lambda functions or something?
If that person can let us know.
Yeah, maybe if you can refine your if that person can refine their question, that'll be easier to understand.
I'm not sure. Oh, GraphQL isn't a popular tool. I don't.
Graphical?
Graphical, as in the popular tool. Yeah, that's what they're asking, I guess. I don't know.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, I didn't.
Write the full question again, please. That way I don't have to. Yes. Another one. Is it possible to create a custom UID?
Custom UID. Yeah, absolutely. Same thing as equality search. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. And I think I think the team had mentioned that you can now have multiple @ID fields in the same type, and I'm not sure if that is in the 2011 release, or it's in the new release. So that if you ask the same question in discuss or Dgraph.io, we'll get the right engineers to answer that for you. But maybe it would help. It would add the convenience functions that you're looking for, where you can just search by the ID. But having said that, search by just exact index and stuff, it already exists, and it probably does the same thing as by ID.
Okay, perfect. Graphical, yes, the graph client. I was wondering, okay, what Manish said, pronounced graphical, the GraphQL client. I was wondering where this would be integrated in the stack. Thanks.
Graphical. I think we do GraphQL Playground. I think the current one that we use inside the Dgraph Cloud. Graphical should work equally well, right? I think any of the GraphQL client should work with Dgraph's GraphQL APIs. So you can choose whatever you want to choose.
Okay, there's all the questions I'm going to take right now. I want to give everybody a good 10-minute break, and I got the other thing up and running. So what I'm going to do is share my screen. I'm going to open up a countdown or something. That's right. I'm going to set this to 10 minutes. I'm going to start it. I'm going to mute, and then we're going to be back in 10 minutes, and we'll continue. We'll continue with everything that we've been doing. And thanks for all the questions, and thanks for hanging out. And I'm going to try to keep managed here as long as I can, or maybe come back.
I'll be around.
And we'll get some more questions.
Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. I'll be around, and I'll try my best to answer.
Okay, we're just about done with that 10 minutes. I pushed a file called, I'm going to share my screen. Hold on. I pushed a file, is that it right here? Dgraph. This changing to dark mode just kind of freaked me out a little bit here. But, okay, I pushed this Dgraph workshop file to the root of the project for now, which has the current, hopefully, I've never played with this export import. So hopefully I did this export and maybe you can import that back in. And at least it has some of these commands here that I want to play with. If I alter any of this stuff and you need it, we'll just export it again. And I'll just push it again. So that hopefully should get you what you need, Sachin. Let me know if it did or didn't. Okay. Another question. GraphQL being the API DSL in itself is a standard enough to be considered agnostic, or would you be using custom directives coupled a service to Dgraph? We will be writing some custom queries and eventually some custom mutations, Michael, because we're getting the basic CRUD out of the way. There are times where you might want to do some custom stuff. And Dgraph has another query language. It's called the Dgraph Query Language. And what DQL does is it kind of gives you access to more graphy kind of things that you might want to do. And one of the support that we have, and I'm going to show it to you before we're done, is that we can wrap DQL inside of a GraphQL custom command. And that's how you can start to gain access to writing DQL, even though your DSL there is still that one GraphQL command. Again, something that I really love, Michael, about this architecture here. And I'm going to show you that before we're done as well, okay? All right. So with all of that kind of said, I wanted to show you the schema that we created, and I couldn't because Insomnia wasn't giving it to me. But there's another GraphQL tool called the GraphQL Playground. And that does give me what I want here. So what I'm going to do, though, is copy it out of there. And I'm going to just create another file off of our project here that I won't save. But at least we can see it. And I'll just call it temp.graphql. And at least we'll be able to see the schema. So let's kind of get back to where we were. I ran this command here. I ran inside of Insomnia a mutation to call update GQL schema off the admin endpoint in our running Dgraph server. I told it I wanted a type named city. I told it I wanted a type named weather, and I bound those, those two types together. We linked them together through this weather link here, right? This field is giving us access to the weather for that city. And then we have a inverse relationship where from the weather we can get back to that city too. So we'll be able to do these types of queries back and forth. Now, let's take a look at the schema that was constructed for inside of Dgraph. And we're going to see some raw stuff too. Let's get to the good stuff, okay? Some of the good stuff here you're going to see are types already related to the city type. This is a document for adding a city, right? A payload coming back out, an input for adding a weather and a payload for that. There's some basic auth there. There's our city type. There it is, the way we defined it. And we see some other support types there. Filters, city order, orderable, city patch. I'm going to show you this as we get to, you also see that there are scalar types predefined for you, like the state time. And you can see that there are different types for the different CRUD operations, the delete. What I really want to get to is two things. I'm going to search for it. Mutation. There it is. We're going to have a type named mutation. This is the CRUD API that was generated for us. This is it. This now gives us the ability to start writing our front ends to do all the basic CRUD that we need. You could see that an add, update, and delete city was provided, and add, update, delete weather was provided for those two types. You could see that input types were provided, and I showed you a little bit quickly what's there. You can also see that now an add can become either a straight add, or it can also become an upsert if we pass true for the upsert flag. Very, very cool. And these are our kind of mutations that we got for free. And you can see the payload on what comes back. So this schema's got it all defined with, again, GraphQL being our DSL here. There's also going to be a type called query. There it is. And this is the retrieve side of our CRUD API. You see here that we've got a get city. We can do it by ID name. We've got our get weather by ID, returns the weather. We can do our get city, returns a city. We also have not just get, but we have query. Queries are going to be based on those extra indexes that we defined. So we'll be able to query a city, in this case by name, because that's where we defined those indexes. We also have the ability to do the query weather. I'll be honest with you, it's been a little bit here, and the aggregate city piece here is new to me. So I really haven't seen that. There must be something new that they've just added to the database. I haven't played with the aggregate commands there. But the get and the query I have, and we're going to play with those right now. Okay, so the whole point here is that not only did we load a type up in the system, we loaded these two types. We defined our IDs here. We now got for free this query API and this mutation API. So what I want to do inside of Insomnia right now is play a little bit with this API. So you can kind of see how we can add a city, or maybe update that city, delete the city, query the city using an API, and how now in our front ends, we get all this stuff for free. So we can't really do anything maybe until we start with adding a city. So let's go into Insomnia here, and you can see here already a little preparation. Not everybody likes my style. I don't like to prepare too much in a talk. I like it to be more dynamic. I like it to be flexible. I like to be able to take it in the direction that people want to take it in. Sometimes that works for people, sometimes it doesn't. It can also mean that things can fail and I can get things wrong, but this is real. This is real life, and I want you to kind of experience that as well. So also based on questions you might have, we could, change focus, change design. We can do those types of things. Okay, but just to make it a little easier for me, I have added already an add city mutation. I want to break this down a little bit because I will tell you this wasn't obvious to me when I was first learning how to kind of put this all together based on the type system. All right. And again, I pushed this up. Let me know that you were able to import that. I'll add to this, and then at the breaks, maybe I'll push up some new stuff. So let's go back to the type for a second, because to me, this is kind of the hardest part when you're first learning how to leverage GraphQL, to make these calls. So we're going to focus on this add city API. And you can see that it takes an input of add city input. It takes a flag, whether or not this is an upsert, and then it takes this add city payload. Now, here's the thing. How do we get the upserts to work? Let's go back to our type system for a second. I said I would come back to this, and I'm going to come back to it now. If you want to do upserts, then what we need, that's as much as it will zoom, so I apologize. So hopefully that's enough for you to see. If you want to be able to do upserts, then we've got to be able to hang our hat on what we're looking at as, say, a document that isn't unique or is unique, right? And that's where this is coming in. What this search by hash at ID is doing is it's supporting our ability to then say we're going to upsert. So in other words, if we already have a document with this name like Miami, and I call add and I say upsert is true, and it sees that that name already is there, then it will do an upsert and just upsert this, right? It will just update it and not create a new city for Miami. So if you want to do upserts, then you're going to pick that field or, you know, that you're doing it on, and then we're going to have this syntax here. If I wasn't doing upserts, I wouldn't need that. Okay, so that's for the upsert support. And we can kind of play with that. So this kind of is hard in this level, right? And I wish Insomnia had given us the schema, but it didn't. But one of the things that the GraphQL playground does is it breaks the schema into a set of documents. Try to make that larger for us. So it does break the schema down into a set of documents that sometimes can add a lot of value to trying to figure this out. So you see here's the mutations. If I click add city, what does it say? It says our input is an add city input. We can set the Boolean to true or false, but we will need that field that I already showed you set. You can see that the add city input and then type details, add city payload. So this is what the payload looks like, which essentially is going to be this city coming back. And the input arguments, add city, well, that's going to take a name. I don't know why that's happening because I ain't touching anything. Maybe because it's running out of UI room. Let's try it again. It's not working very well, is it? Funny stuff. All right, well, whatever. You can see that we have that information. So one nice thing about the GraphQL playground, when it isn't doing what it's doing right now, is it gives us a kind of a better view in looking at these types and understanding them. But I'll be honest with you, a lot of the time I was kind of just copying the schema out and I was looking for these types, like in my document here. Here it is right here, name, lat, long, weather. And now that's the input that we're going to have to provide, knowing that these three are mandatory. All right. So let's take a look at how this schema translates back to being able to execute this query, at least here in Insomnia. So I've got a folder called CRUD, and you can see here some of the settings in Insomnia. I am now using the GraphQL endpoint on port 8080. That's how we're going to execute this GraphQL. Now, as it relates to headers, the only header that I'm making sure is set is this content type for application JSON. However, in the GraphQL client that I wrote, if we can find that again, I know I use a couple more headers. So let me just look at that real quick so I can make sure that we're complete. I think by default, and the GraphQL client lets you set this as well, but I think by default, yeah, here they are. Okay, so when you're using my GraphQL client, I make sure that we have the no cache set, content type, and the accept comes back as JSON. I do that. You have the ability to set more keys, especially if you're doing authentication, you're going to have to set more headers. But at least I have those. I don't have to worry about that right now here. At least I just set the content type to JSON. Okay, we're not doing any auth or anything like that yet. Now on this tab, I set GraphQL. That's what another beautiful thing about this tool. It already knows how to form the back end side of a GraphQL command. If you kind of want to see what that is, just kind of in the raw, it's this. Those GraphQL commands get wrapped around this structure, where there's a query with the GraphQL query, and then any variables you might have for substitution. So essentially what Insomnia is doing is it's taking this for me already, and it's wrapping it in this sort of query variable structure. So I don't have to do that manually with a post call. It's just kind of a nice convenience, right? Okay. So let's do the following. Right now, we don't have any cities loaded. We only set the schema. So let's walk through the type, the type system here. So it's going to be a type mutation. Okay, so we're going to run this mutation. then what we're going to say here is that we're going to execute this add city command. You might be saying, Bill, what is this response colon in front of the add city command? Technically, we don't need it. Technically, oh, look at that. I clicked on that and we got documentation. Oh, I just learned something every time I give a workshop. Mr. Kennedy learns something. I didn't know this tool did that. How cool is that? Okay, so we actually have documentation right here. Here's our add input city. There it is. Oh man, I didn't even know it did that. I totally clicked on that by accident. Wow, that is so cool. Okay, I know, I'm excited. Nobody else is. It's okay, it's all good. So let's get back to this. No, I don't know how to close it. Oh, up here, I have a window in front of me. Okay, good. So what I'm doing with these colons as it relates to GraphQL, it's an alias. It gives you the ability to define what the field is going to look like here. I'm going to get rid of it first so you can understand, and then we'll put it back on the next city that we add. So as we go back into the schema, we're going to say a mutation. This took me a long time to figure out. I don't think it's as obvious as people think. Once you get it in your head, you're fine. But we've got a mutation. We've got our add city command that we got for free. Now the add city command takes parentheses and it takes a field called input. So we see that our input is right here. Now, if you notice, the add input is a collection of add city inputs. So what the add city command is doing is it's letting us add more than one city at a time. That's pretty nice, right? So if you're going to do this, say, bulk city add, well, the API already supports it. So we're only going to add the one city. So I've got the brackets, and then we're using our, curly brackets as our document for each city. And then based on that type that we talked about here, add city input, we have our name, we have our lat, and we have our long. Now here I'm saying upsert true. I could either ignore that, or I could set it, I could ignore that, or I can say upset true here. Let's just use the upsert because I did define the field properly. And then after this, right? After this, that's the call to add city. The next is the response. And that's just formed as another document. And what I'm saying on the response is, let's go back to what the response is supposed to look like. Let's see if that tells us here. Add city payload, beautiful. The add city payload is going to be a city. And then you have the choices of bringing back the ID, the Latin long, or the name, right? Or even a full weather document. What I'm doing right now is just bringing back the ID because that's all I need after an add. I want to know what the unique ID was. This is really nice, right? Because I've worked in databases before where you've asked the database to generate an ID, but you need to do another query to get it back. Here we don't. It's going to come back. Plus any data that you also want to come back related to that city node. So I'm just going to say ID for now. That's all we're going to do. Now, if I hit send, we get this document. But what's interesting is really this. This is what we're going to be focusing on in the code we write. You can see we get back a document with the field data. Then add city came back as the field for the add here, and then city came back here. And then we got the ID of 2. Now that's pretty cool, right? But the problem is, what it means is that any document that we get back on the return, the name of these fields are going to be based on the name of the mutation, right? And the name of the document. But that can be really tedious. So one of the things I did, and we'll say we'll do it for Miami. And let's say Miami's at, I don't know, 37 and minus 82. It doesn't matter. What I said is, this is really restrictive here. We don't want this add city. I need something to be more generic. It doesn't matter if I'm adding a city or weather or advisory. What this really is going to be is a response. So GraphQL gives us the ability to do this alias. We could say, no, I don't want this to be add city or add weather or update. No, I want it to always be response. And then I wanted the return document, which I don't remember what we put there, to be, maybe I can do this instead. I can remember, entities. Yeah, I called it entities. So look, What's beautiful here is that we can alias all this stuff that's going to come back. So let's now say that we're going to add Miami. Remember this, data add city, city ID. Now watch what happens when we add Miami. And remember that was also O2. Miami's probably going to be O3. You see how we're just incrementing that by 1. Now look at the response. It's response, it's entities, and now I have been able to generalize the document that comes back, which now means that I can write code in my UI, in my clients. They don't have to be specific to each mutation, command, and return. I can generalize that, I can alias that, and now build code that always says, when we get a response, this is what it looks like, a set of entities, there we are. I didn't know they existed either until I did a workshop one day and I was complaining how I had to write all this tedious code. And somebody said, Bill, why don't you just use an alias, right? That's why I love teaching these workshops, because there's always somebody smarter than me that knows more than me, and then I learn something. So yes, these aliases are genius. They really are going to help you be able to kind of generalize the processing of the response. Okay, so we've just constructed 2 cities. I got a city in New York with ID 02 and a city in Miami, which is 3. How do we get to do the queries now? Okay, what I'm going to do here is we're going to code. Oh, actually, I do have a query folder. Brilliant. I already have a get city. So what I'm going to do is we're going to look at we're going to break down the get city, and then you're going to watch me struggle. Because look, I mean, I don't honestly do this every single day, but you're going to watch me struggle trying to do, we'll do like another get call, but based on the name. And we'll see if I can figure this out on the fly after doing this for a while. If you're struggling with syntax, you should be, okay? This isn't SQL. This isn't like this stuff takes time. Okay, let's take a look at our get city call. Now, get city again, GraphQL. We can specify GraphQL here, the same header. And now we're back to this. So if you remember, this started out as a mutation. On the query side, this starts out as query. Now, if we look at the API again, what do we know about the query? Let's go look for type query. There it is. We know that if we're going to do a get city, which is what I'm going to do, we need an ID. We have this name, and then we get back a city value. In this case, I only care about the ID. So again, as I learned here, that's our city type. It can take an ID, yeah, no, that's the return though, get city, type get city. Interesting, I would have thought that said get city. Oh, query get city colon query. Oh, so isn't that funny? That's not coming up here, just the return type. Interesting, maybe they think it's just obvious. Anyway, that's why I always copy the schema when I'm working on something like this. Okay, so query, we got it. Get city, we got it. We can query that on ID, we got it for O2. And then that returns a city document, which right now could be ID name Latin long, that's all we've set. Okay, let me send this to our Dgraph server and see what we get. Look, there it is again, data, get city, ID, blah, blah, blah. But once again, it's probably better for me to say, no, I want this to be the response. Let's send it again. Boom, there's a response. Those aliases again, doing well. What do you mean lost in transit? Like it was lost in the network packet drop? What is that, what you're looking for? That most clients use HTTP, which handle most of that for you, but the whole thing got lost and you probably lost the entire connectivity. Oh, I read the wrong thing. What happens if the mutation request or response gets lost in transit from the UI to the, if it gets lost? I'm not really sure what you mean by gets lost. This is all HTTP socket level communication. So if you have that socket connection, it really shouldn't get lost. Can you upload files? You can export and import data into Dgraph, and that's a whole nother conversation around making sure you have backups of your data. But Dgraph does have the ability to export and import the data itself, and they have the facilities for that as well. I can have Manish talk more about that at the next break. Okay, Eric? So, I mean, George. There it is. Does anyone work with naked UIs, generating forms, tables? I'm going to tell you this, Eric, while we're here. I am not a fan of code generation. I've seen too many people try to do this with the database. And all I can ask you, and I'm going to show you how I do it in Go as well in a second. I'm going to ask you to stay away from code generation here for several reasons. One, it's critically important that when you're writing code, that you make things easy to understand and not easy to do. And especially when it comes to the database. Your database queries are critical core components of the application you're writing. If you're using code generation there and there's a bug and you want to fix it, you could be affecting every single query in the system. I much rather you be tedious, take the time, hand code those commands. I'm going to show you how I do it in Go, and have full control at the query level if there's problems. Stay away from code generation. I know it makes things easy to do, but you got to focus on making things easy to understand. The problem here is that code generation makes the easy things easier, but it makes the hard things almost impossible. I can't say it any other way. So please, please, please really try to stay away from code generation here. Control the query, even though it's going to be somewhat tedious. You're going to thank yourself when those bugs are in production. You need to not worry about your time at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when there's no stress. If something takes you an extra 5 minutes, who cares? There's no stress. When does the stress come? When the bug's in production and you got to fix it right away. And now you're ripping through code generation because you can't get to the query itself. Stay away from this stuff, please. It can only hurt you. It can't help you. Manish jumped back online. Can you quickly talk about the import export of data in Dgraph? I haven't played with that myself yet, but I know you have it. And then maybe also how that works in Slash real quick.
Yeah, so to import data into Dgraph, there's two mechanisms, right? One is the live loading and one is bulk loading. So typically when people come in from existing systems, they might have like, billions of records that they need to import quickly into Dgraph, and that's like to bootstrap their Dgraph cluster. So bulk loader is really suited for that. It's much faster. And so that's what we recommend. In fact, bulk loader is basically as fast as how many codes you give it. Now, the other one is when you actually already have a Dgraph cluster running live and you want to load some data, then we recommend people using the live loader. Live loader and bulk loader both are able to read RDFs and JSON. And so live loader essentially runs, gives you all the guarantees that Dgraph gives you, which is transactionality and consistency and so on and so forth. Now, in the Dgraph Cloud, live loader works just as you would expect. It's just a gRPC endpoint. The bulk loader in the Dgraph Cloud, the way it works is that you would upload your data to some S3 bucket or something, and let us know, and then we can then run the bulk loader for you. I think hopefully by the end of this quarter, or we would be able to make all of this automated so that you can just give us the address of your S3 bucket and everything can be automated. But right now, for running bulk loader in the cloud, it has to go through the Dgraph team.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, I think we've answered all the questions that are there right now. That's good. Look, everybody, this is really important. I am learning just like all of you, okay? I built that travel project to learn this stuff, and there's so much more I want to do because there's so much more coming. So I don't have all the answers either. I so much appreciate, Manish, that you're here to help with the hard questions that I'm not going to be able to answer. The good thing is that you can always reach out to me, and I will find answers for you, and I will learn as we go as well. So again, at the end of the talk, I'll make sure that you have access to getting in touch with me, and I'll try to get all the answers that I can for you, and anything new and interesting we'll add and introduce into this project. So this becomes that, starter kit for everybody that's going on there. All right, before we take our next break, I want to do a couple more things here as we're doing. So you can see here that I called to get city. Some of you had problems running this mutation because you're working with a version of Dgraph that doesn't support upserts yet. Remember, I am running the latest master probably not even the latest. I haven't updated it in a little bit, but I'm running a master version of Dgraph from 7 days ago. I'm always working off a master to help Dgraph find bugs. So this is coming in that next final release. So if you're having problems with the upsert, just remove it. Just remove that, and it should work. Okay, and now you're seeing how the get city works again with some of that aliasing, and we see it. I should be able to say 03, hit send, and now we see the Miami there. As of now, you don't have direct loading from DB directly. You still need staging to S3 for live loading. We need GSCP format. Okay, I don't know about that. Maybe Manish can answer that question real quick. Do you see that question there on the?
What's the question again? Sorry.
I don't know if it's a question or a statement. As of now, you don't have direct loading from DB directly. You need staging into S3. And for live loading, we need gRPC format. No, it's a statement.
Yeah, so for live loading, so gRPC is built into Dgraph Cloud. So if you just take that URL that you get from Dgraph Cloud and put that into the Dgo client or whatever other clients we have, it does a bit of like magic there. Well, it's not that much of a magic, just like replaces something and adds a subdomain there called .grpc. And so it connects to the gRPC endpoint and works. So that's enough for live loader. So if you go to Dgraph live tool and just, I think they should have a -- cloud, and you can just put your API key and the cloud endpoint that you got from the cloud. That should be sufficient. For bulk loader, yes, as I mentioned, you'll have to stage your files up in some S3 bucket and give us access or tell us how to access it. And and just reach out to support team and we will help you there.
Brilliant. And a lot of that reaching out to support team is going to be on your, I never remember if it's called Discord or Discord. I don't remember.
Discuss is for, it's actually Discourse, but we just call it Discuss. It's just simpler. It's not Discord.
I always get that wrong, man. I'm like, when you can't wire into that. It's the forum, the Dgraph forum. Forum.dgraph.io, right?
Yeah, forum is a bit old school, Discuss is like in thing. But it's the same thing. It is exactly a forum. Actually, it's written by the guy who wrote Stack Overflow. Big fan of that guy. But this would actually this probably won't go through Discuss. I mean, we'll probably just tell you to like run like a Jira ticket on. There's a support link on the left hand side of the Dgraph Cloud. So if you just go to the support link and just follow along. That would go privately to our ticketing system, and we can then help you privately, because sometimes people have private data that they don't want to talk about in front of the public.
George just asked, on the cloud, dgraph.io, I'm seeing a files panel with the legend coming soon, or storage panel coming soon.
Yeah.
Is that going to be available?
Soon. Soon. I think should be available in the next within the next 3 weeks or so. Essentially, we're going to expose how much data you're using on disk, and that data on disk is essentially compressed data, typically. So we'll expose how much data you're using on disk, and that would be visible over there. And we'll also like add more stuff like ingress and egress. So we actually want to have more information on the dashboard than what we have today. So all of that is going to be coming in the coming months.
Okay, brilliant. So this is what we're going to do. It's 21 minutes after the hour. We're kind of closing in on our second hour here. I'm going to give everybody a 10-minute break right now. That will get us to basically 30 minutes after the hour. Then we get back. We're going to continue to play with executing some of these queries. I'm going to try to do something by hand. I'm going to stumble. We're all going to laugh. But we're going to enjoy it, and we're going to learn. Oh, that's it. Discuss.graph.io. So look at that link there. That's how you can get to the forum and ask questions and get community support. And oh man, I'm old school. Now I'm 51 years old, man. You got to give me a break here. But I'm going to put 10 minutes on the board here. Take a break. Let me get back to a browser here. Oh, we have countdown here. All right. Take a break, and then when we get back, we'll keep moving this workshop forward.
Bill, we can't hear you if you're speaking.
No, I didn't unmute. You know, this is happens when I lose my production people. I have to do it myself. Thanks for reminding me. Anthony, look, at the end of the day, everybody wants you to succeed, and it's not about being perfectionist. You're going to make mistakes. Things are going to blow up. It's going to happen. You just roll with it, and it's all good. Okay, we've got no more questions here. I've got 2 that are pending, and I'm going to wait to the end of the talk here. Okay, so let's get back into our sharing mode here, and I wanted to do more. We now have the ability to do that get city call with our 2 IDs. But as I said to you back into our code for a second, I wanted to play with the query city call. Now, the query city call looks a little complicated because there's filters and ordering and first and offsets. But we don't need all of this, right, to get back a city. Now, look, I don't try to, first of all, let me come in here at least, and we'll add maybe I can duplicate this one. That's even better. And we'll call it query city. I'll make sure that some of this gets back up there for you. So I've just kind of duplicated that, which is really nice, which means my headers and my post and all that stuff is good. But I want to play with the query city call. So let's do the following. What I tend to do sometimes is I kind of jump back in the code. And this is that opportunity when I was talking about don't do code gen, anything but code gen here for your database. This gives you an opportunity to show you why. Because since I don't do code gen, I can cheat a little bit on the call to query city. So under business data, I'm going to find my city package. And under the city package, I should be able to find the code I wrote for doing a query city. And here's one right here. Here is query by name, right? The API query by name where I get to do a query city. Look how beautiful this is. Anybody can come in here, see that query and know what I'm executing. And if there's a bug with that query and I have to change it, this is the only code that's changing. We've isolated a change to this one location as opposed to code gen. So because this, and also, by the way, if you do what I'm asking you to do here, regardless of the database you're using, if it's SQL or anything else, I get to do this. Go right into my tool. And I can start working with it. Look at that. It's not like code gen where I'm trying to even pull something out of a file. It's not hidden and none of this stuff. I don't know. I've been doing this for 30 something years and I've tried it all, and this for me is great. So what do we have here now? We have the query city command that I was able to just copy and paste out of my code, which means that once I get it working in Insomnia, I can go in the other direction too. I can copy it out of Insomnia and paste it in here. Now, there is something missing here, right? This is just the query part. This is the query part. Remember, the query part is a filter or an ordering or first and offset. And right now I'm just doing a filter based on the name where that name equals Miami. Okay, good. And then I'm asking for, actually in this case, I'm asking for all of those fields. Am I not? And then if you just look in this case, it's simple because the return document comes right after the call to query. The CRUD operations are a little different. Now I'm asking for name, ID name, and lat long. If you go back into my Go code, and you could do this in any programming language, by the way, you're seeing it in Go, but it doesn't have to be done like this. You can do this the same as what I'm saying, in whether you're doing Ruby or C# or Java, I don't care what it is. You could handwrite your queries like this, substitute those query names in there. You're not going to have like SQL injection bugs here. And then we can marshal the result documents back out. You can notice that this is saying we're going to get back a collection. I go back here, we can see here that the result is going to be a collection of cities. You can see that in the code here, which I defined a literal struct that represents a collection of city values. So when we execute it, it can be marshaled into the result, and I can at least validate we got one city back. But the big thing here was that copy and paste, because now as I'm working with you here online, I was able to just copy that in. I hit send, voila, there's Miami. I didn't have to do any work kind of decoding this. What was the other one? New York. Let's see, it's spelled correctly, hopefully. Send, there it is, there's New York. So how cool is that? You know, we got this for free. Okay. And so now based on this schema, we were able to, I want to see what this city filter looks like again. Let's find that type. I probably should have just written input. There it is. ID name has and or right. And we said name because we put a index on the name field. And therefore we were able to say name equals. Okay, brilliant. All right, let me go back to our type query, because you know what's interesting to me while I have you all here is this aggregate city. I don't know what this actually does. I've never seen this before. This looks really new to me. It looks like we can get back lat min, lat max, sum, average. Oh, look at this. It's an aggregation of all of the cities. Yeah, I didn't even know that was there. This is new, at least in the version that I'm looking at. So that would mean that I would have to be able to filter on all cities, right? 2011, I think. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. So you know what I'm thinking now, again, as I'm learning here. You look at my city filter. It could have an ID, it could have a name, could I run this query without any filter at all? Will it come back with everything? I have no idea. Well, let's see what happens. I have no idea what's going to happen here. Oh, look at that. I love playing here. So now we've got both New York and city. I really want to play with this aggregation API real quick. I just want to see what happens now that we have it here. So let's just do it, if you will entertain me. Because it looks like basically it just takes a city filter, which I can pretty much leave empty again. Oops, I didn't even know that does it. It's kind of annoying sometimes when I don't want it, isn't it? Maybe I can do that and it comes back with a city. Oh, but we have to see the fields now, right? Because, so maybe I can just hack this really quick while we're on the fly. You see, if I had a slide deck, we wouldn't have been able to have all this fun, would we? Count. Name. I'm just super curious what happens here. I just want to see the result. I don't have necessarily a need for this in my did I did it right? Oh, look at that. You can also aggregate on edges. So if you have anything with an edge to multiple items, you can aggregate on that. This is really super, super cool stuff that you're getting for free as part of your CRUD API. And you can see here how that aggregate, this is the first time I've ever ran this command. But again, because I'm pulling my raw queries out of my Go code, I can move really fast here and we can kind of play with this. And if you're watching the chat, Anthony's telling us all the other kind of really cool things that we can do with all this aggregation as well. All right, even though that was all fun and all, I'm gonna put that back here. And we've got our query city. So what we've seen so far is that I was able to add a basic city. There it is. And then I was able to query the city by ID. I'm able to query the city by name. And we saw this new sort of kind of aggregation support that is now, let's just say type query. That's now part of the API that you get for free. And we got to play with it. And Anthony's given us a lot of cool other information about it. When I learned GraphQL, so I was, read everything that Alexei is saying. Okay, what do I want to do next? I want to explore a couple more things here. Let's get back to our type city. Actually, let's get back to the create schema that we did here. I want to explore this kind of relationship by adding a weather node now to our city. It wasn't mandatory. What I want to do is show you how we can construct a weather node and at the same time bind it to one of the cities we have. Let's say we'll use Miami. If we go back to 03 as Miami, And what I want to show you is how we can now, maybe what we'll do is an add weather command, where at that point we can bind the city in, and then we'll have the relationship that we want to be able to kind of query back and forth. How cool would that be? So let's come in, and what I'm gonna do is duplicate my add city. We'll call it add weather. There it is. So we're all set up. And again, I'm not going to try to guess all this stuff here. I'm going to go back into the source code that we have for this project. Another reason why I shared it. Well, actually, let's not leave that for a second. And again, under data, we should see weather. And under weather, we should see some APIs here for, you can see here that I have a replace. So one of the things that I do in this project is I delete the weather node and then always put a new one in. I don't need to maintain history on the weather. And so I was experimenting with the APIs on being able to kind of do a delete and then an add. So if you see this replace call, after it checks that we have information, it queries to validate that the city, we have a weather with that city ID. And then we can do a delete and we can do an add. And so it's this add that I kind of want to look at right now. Aren't we all happy that I just wrote these mutations out manually so we can all just copy and paste them? Yeah, here we go. So let me take this mutation. I'm only going to take up to description because, well, let me take the whole thing and then we'll remove the parts that we don't need. So what's nice now is I can put all this in. We only maintained our type to the description. So I can copy and paste that in. Again, I'm going to alias the response, add weather, the input. Let's go back and look at our schema real quick for the mutation. We're not blind. Okay. So now we're doing an add weather. Notice that add weather doesn't have an upsert option. Why? Because we didn't on the schema create put that support in. Okay, we don't have that, so we don't have the upsert option. I didn't need it here, so we didn't do it. Okay, so again, add weather input, add weather payload. So we go to add weather. There's our add weather command. We're doing the alias there. The input is a city for some ID. So let's say 0x03. And then what we're going to do here, right, we're adding it actually. So I want to, this is the cool part. This is the part I just missed saying to you. We're going to do it for Miami. We're just pretending this is data coming in. Beautiful, I can't even spell anymore. Beautiful weather, whatever, right? That's the description. It's Miami, it's beautiful weather. There we go. But here's the key. Here's the key. Here's the key. Here's the key. Okay. Look at what I'm doing here for the city. I'm just applying the ID field and giving it the 03 ID. That now immediately, when I add this weather node, binds it to that city. Could I have defined an entire new city here? I could. I could have decided that add weather, or this weather node is going to have its own copy of a city. I could have left out the ID, put in all the fields, and generated another city with that name, let's say with a new ID, and I could have used what we call value semantics here. But in this case, this is beautiful because in one command, and I like the word Alexa's just saying, stitching. In one command, I'm creating a weather node and stitching it or binding it to the city. If we had to do this in SQL, right, this could be a multi kind of operation. So really, really kind of love this here. Okay, but there's a thing. Remember with the mutations, we have to specify the return document. Any suggestion for making sure the ID being passed is a city and not some other type? Nick, what I would say is that we want to do that inside our, you have to do that before you make the call, right? So if we come back here in weather, this add function is assuming everything's okay, but at least right now, I'm doing the query, right? So in this particular Go code, the way I solved your question, which is how can we guarantee that ID is a city? I'm making sure here that we can query that. You may have to do that in your UIs. However, again, at some point tonight, I'm going to show you how we can write some custom queries that could do these multiple things for you. And then you'd be able to kind of do it all in that GraphQL there. All right. Again, I'm going to specify on that last question, do not use code generation. Stay away from it. Look at what I did here on the ad as well. This ad has our mutation, right? I've laid it all out, nice and clean. I'm able to copy and paste it and work with it. This was the real problem with laying it out. It was the response. So how did I handle the response? I defined a type in Go called result, and I added a method named document. Now, if I go to my models, I see the result type. This is the data that I want to get back, and the document method knows how to put that back into GraphQL. This is how I'm doing it. I'm defining types for the result. So what we can then do is unmarshal into that result. Notice here that I should be constructing a result somewhere. Where's the result? Oh yeah, here, right here, type ID. I'm constructing a result to its 0 value state. That has a method that knows how to finish this document, and then it gets bound. So it's all here, whether it's a query or a mutation, it's all here, which now means, again, what? That I can come into my code base, go to the models, look at the document that we're attaching for the result. I can just put it in. And now I should be able to add this weather node, binding it to the Miami city. And this should work. Let's see. Now, what it says is I made a mistake down here, right? Which again, is going to be quite possible because we're playing with this on the fly. Cannot query message field untype add. Oh, let's double check our add weather payload. Maybe that was wrong or something now, which okay, here we go. Let's take a look at our add weather payload again. We should get member IDs. So maybe that's not there anymore. Let's see, which is interesting. Yeah. So it looks like maybe some of the code I have there, I'm going to have to run some tests now. No, but I did run it. So that's really interesting. I'm going to have to look into that later because I am asking for that message here. And now I've just been told that that message doesn't exist. And we know it doesn't exist because when I look at the type, it only has UIDs. So I'm gonna have to double check some of that stuff. Message is available on the delete payload. Interesting. So maybe I used the wrong model, but I don't think I did because this is an add. We used a result. Oh, I did use the wrong model. Sorry, this was what I wanted right here. I used the wrong type. So I apologize for that. So thank you, Anthony. I used the wrong type, but that was supposed to be what I wanted to return, an alias of entities, and I wanted the weather ID back. So I made a mistake with the document that I copied, but it happens. But we do now have weather for Miami. So maybe what we can now do is we'll go back to our get city for Miami and we'll add weather. And then under weather, we have these fields. Look how this is coming out, which is pretty good. So we got our weather ID. What else did we, well, we already know what city we're in. I don't know how to bring that up. Oops. Oops. All right, instead of me fighting my ignorance on what's in a weather, Let's just bring it up. Okay. Oh yeah, we have the city name and description, right? So let's just do city name and description. So if that works, there we are. So now you see how I was able to also pull out now the weather, which had ID 4 for Miami in here, and it now says beautiful weather. You can see here that we have the weather node there, and we have ID, city name, and description. Thank you, Anthony, for all your help, right? And they're aggregating the weather now for average temperatures and stuff. There's a real use case for that. Yep, I agree. Is there a good book or some starter book on GraphQL? I briefly read the specs. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't really find a good book. I really fought through some documents and building out this code. And part of this code that I'm sharing with you is kind of to really help you get up and running with that kind of stuff. Somebody else might have a good recommendation for a book. I'll ask Manish when we take our next break. But it looks like there's a GraphQL in action that recently got released. So maybe that's the book that you can look at. The beautiful part is that you load your Dgraph instance, you have your Insomnia, and you can play with all of that stuff. Okay, so we now see that we have the weather node there. But what's now interesting is we could also now, from a get weather, we should be able to now get all that city information too for that Miami city, right? So why don't we do that as well? We know that our weather here is IDO, no, that's Miami right there because IDO through Miami. So the weather is IDO4. But why don't we do this? Why don't we duplicate query city? Actually, let's not duplicate that one. Let's duplicate get city. Let's call it get weather, just so you can see this real quick. Get weather, there it is. I duplicated it. Let's go back into the code. And in this, oh, we already were in weathers, sorry. And we can look for our get calls here. There's query. This one is kind of cool. This is query by city, right? So for this city, let's see what this does. This brings back our weather by city. This is really why I wanted the relationship there, isn't it? Okay. Okay. So query by city returns specified weather from the database by the city ID. Why don't we take this one? This one's interesting to play with. In fact, it's the only one that I've got. So let's take a look at this query real quick. Okay, again, we're playing with the Miami city, so that's 03. So now, what is this call to get city doing? This is actually not a call to get weather, it's a call to get city, where we're bringing back all of this information from that weather node, and we're even documenting inside the city there. And you can see here that I didn't add these fields, so I didn't like it. And now we get back that. So you see now, because of that relationship, we're able to get that weather information for a particular city because all of that is kind of linked in. And I should be able to do the same on the other side. So look, anything else I do kind of there, I think is going to be a duplication of effort. And I think at this point, what you've been able to at least see so far is that with this kind of schema that we started, I've been able to use the generated CRUD API to add, to get, and you can imagine the updates and the deletes would be working as well, right? Like, I'm not going to spend time doing something that at this point I think is kind of fairly obvious that you can play with yourself using the tool. So what is something new that I can share with you here that isn't going to be necessarily obvious? Let's do the following, because I think this might be kind of fun to do and see if we can actually do it on the fly. Are you ready for this? I have never attempted to do this before outside of this code, but I think it would be super cool if we can do it. What do you say? Okay, let's just see if we can do it. Worst case scenario, we can't, but whatever. I mean, things happen. Okay, let me take a little bit of this code here, a little bit at a time here. I'm gonna steal this code And we're going to play with it in Insomnia, and we're going to change it up a little bit. What I'm going to do, and this is going to be for my friend who asked the first question at 5 o'clock about custom business logic and maybe things like that. I want to move this away for a second. In fact, I'm moving too much at the same time. So we're going to do this in a much smaller way. Let's see if we can define a custom query that we can run from Insomnia. Okay, just kind of something simple so you can see how we can extend the query API. Right now, we can't extend the mutation API, but it is in the works to do. And I'm really looking forward to being able to extend the mutation API, primarily because I want to be able to write some custom DGraphQL queries and mutations that can play with facets. And so eventually I've been playing with this, but I think I need to be able to write a custom mutation. It's not there yet. So what we're going to do is just write a custom query. Now, we can name this query anything we want. And so what I'm going to do here, just to keep things fairly small, is let's just say that we're going to define our own query. And maybe we'll just call it, we can't call it get city. We're going to call it the Bill City query. Can we call it the Bill City query? Okay, cool. And what we'll do is, I know we don't necessarily have to write this because we got this for free, but I think it's going to be fun. And what we can say here is that this is going to return a city. Okay. Now, what I'm doing is defining a custom query called Bill City, which takes a city name that's mandatory, and it returns a city. The cool thing is you can define your own return types, right? This particular custom query that I did is going to call a URL, and we'll figure out how to do that in a second. But you can see here that we defined our own sort of upload response. We said it was remote. Actually, maybe we need to do that too. So why don't we do that just to stay kind of in line? What we'll do is we'll call this the bill response. We'll say it's remote. And maybe we'll just say that it comes back with a city name and some message. This would be fun. Okay. This is going to be really fun. Because what's happening here is there's a couple of different ways that we can do this. I'm not going to play with a custom DQL like you see that. What's cool about this command that we're going to build is that it's going to give us the ability to make a web API call. So let's see if we can actually pull this off here. Okay. So in order to make any sort of API call, we're going to need an API. What is saying? David is saying this stuff is difficult. Yeah, David, it's taken me a long time to get here. And if you're feeling that way, it's completely fair. You've got to kind of learn and play with this and make mistakes and do this kind of stuff. But if you've worked with databases for a long time, you'll really appreciate a lot of what's going on here. Okay, so we need to write a custom endpoint that's going to return some data. Yeah. So how can we do that? What can we do here? Well, why don't we, you guys ready for this? Are you ready for this? Why don't we do something really interesting and fun here? We've got some time, so hopefully you're interested in this. Why don't we come, we're not going to save this stuff to the project, but just so you can kind of see it. I'm going to call this hack. New file, main.go. I don't know how many of you code in Go, and obviously this isn't a Go class, but the whole idea of what I'm trying to accomplish right now is I want to create a custom query that can execute maybe this endpoint, HTTP, localhost. Maybe we'll do it on port 3000. And we'll call this Bill. And maybe we'll do it with a get call, just to keep it simple. And what we're going to do is take a city name in. All right. And then what we'll do is we'll make sure that this API call returns a bill response back out that we should be able to get back in our response document. Right. This is a way of maybe doing this kind of custom HTML. We have to write the bill endpoint here. So I'm going to really hack some code here. And this is a total hack here, but this is the cool part. Write a function, we'll call it bill. And what it's going to do is it's going to be an HTTP response writer. And it's going to take a pointer to an HTTP request. There it is. I'm totally doing it on this fly. So if this doesn't work, don't sacrifice me to the demo gods. Okay. Okay, here we go. Now, what do we know about our custom endpoint again? That we want to be able to, well, we're going to get this document right here in the response, city name with a city name in it. So why don't we do that first? This is going to be our input, right? Input is going to be a, actually we can do var here. Var input struct, and we know this is going to have a city name. It's going to be a string, and it's going to come in as JSON, as city name. There it is, and it's going to be a message. Oh no, wait, this is the input, which is just city name, which actually looks like this. So let's just make sure that we do it that way. And this is just the input here. So I've defined a type set to its 0 value state, and it's complaining because we haven't used it yet. But this input document is going to represent this input document if life is good. Then what we need to do is marshal that. So what we're going to do is use our JSON package, and we'll say new decoder. We have our response body. There it is. That's our reader. I'm doing everything right. And then what we'll do is decode that into the address of our input. There it is. This is going to potentially return an error right here. So again, since we're hacking, there we go. We're going to check that error. And if error doesn't equal nil, then what we'll do is we'll just say log.fatal, and we'll fatal that error. So hopefully, actually, I don't want to do a log.fatal here. Let's just do a log.println with the word error, and we'll get our error. Okay, so hopefully we're able to decode that from the response body if everything goes right there. Yeah, we'll see. Okay, now what happens is I have the input, right? And we're just going to do a basic turnaround. So the bill response, okay, we can do this. We can say our response is going to be another struct, and that struct is going to have the city name, right, which is a string. And again, we're going to do our JSON city name this way. And it's going to have a message, which is a string. And that's going to be a JSON message right there. That's how we want to marshal it. And then what we can do is populate that. So the city name will match our input.city name. And then our message is, can't believe this worked. It's going to work. I promise it's going to work. Boom. So we got our response. I hope everybody's laughing at me right now as we try to do this. And if you're not interested in Go, then I apologize. If you are a Go developer, maybe you're having some fun here. And now we have to send it back down the pipe as JSON. So let's do a JSON.new encoder for w.encode response. Interesting. And this could be an error. So let's do the same thing here. Let's take the error and we'll at least log it. Error. And maybe we'll just say error decode, encode, and everything else should be kind of cool. So at least what I've done here is been able to decode the body and I'm just going to basically return the data back, right? So I've got a handler. Now, what we'll do is we'll just use, it's not really production oriented, but what we'll do is we'll use the default server mux to bind all this stuff. So HTTP dot, I remember how to do this, default server mux, and we want to add handle, and the pattern can just be, what did we say, bill. That's what we're setting up here, slash bill, and we're going to give it our bill function. So there it is. That should bind in there. Now it didn't like something handle. It needs a handler. That is, oh, that's the default. Yeah, that should have worked here. So what is it complaining about? Can I use bill as type as handler and function server mux missing? So I never use the default server mux. So I'm going to look at one. I never use the default server mux, but that should have. All right, let's do it this way for a second. Actually, that's wrong. Hold on. Handle, does that go? Oh, that's it. I never use the default server mux, so I think that's where I'm having problems. Again, it doesn't. What is this supposed to be, Mr. Kennedy? Response writer has to be an HTTP response writer, which I did, and a pointer to a request as handler value missing. Method serve HTTP. Oh, HTTP. Boy, why am I confused? Okay, this is what we're going to do, because my brain is shutting down at 7 o'clock, and this is some basic stuff that I should have in the top of my head, and I don't, because I never use the default server mux. Actually, let's do this, because we can pull it off this way really quickly. Let's do this real quick. I'm not going to give up right away. I don't know why my brain is shutting down on the easy stuff here, but I'm going to bring up this project really quickly. And I'm going to look at a little bit of code that I wrote. Well, that's it. Debug handle function. Handle func, Mr. Kennedy. There it is. This is why you need code all the time to reference. All right, let's do it again. So I need the default server must handle function to take a function, not a value that implements this. So that should be good. Thank you. So that registers our handle function. Sorry, I didn't know that off the top of my head. We're still trying to go here. And then what we can just do, and again, we're hacking this, so it's okay. HTTP listen and serve. And we're going to do this on port 3000, like I said. And we're going to use the default server mux. So this is in production level code, but it is here. And actually, we can't do a get because we're going to have the post data, aren't we? So what we're going to have to also do then is make this a post to really make that work. Okay, so we have our bill, we have our post, we have this. The only other thing I'm going to have to do in here is check. Well, you know what? We'll just make sure we do a post call and we'll be fine. All right, let's just see if this code comes up now. Again, this is all hacking. But let's see what happens here. Go build. I didn't see any error messages. We should have put some logging in there. But we should be listening on port 3000 right now. In fact, what's going to happen then is that if this all fails, we're probably not even returning a 500. Man, what a total hack this is. But I don't have anything for a get. So let's just do something here. If r.method equals HTTP method get, and what we'll do then is we'll just do a basic kind of response here, right? Maybe we'll just say struct status string, just so we know that it's working, right? Or at least the get call. And then we'll just do, again, our JSON stuff here. Let me just copy this. I just want to make sure it's working before we try to do anything. Encoder, response, there it is. That really shouldn't fail, but at least we have it there. And oh yeah, we're missing, no, I should need a struct there. We have that, Response, struct. I'm almost don't even care if that, what is this complaining about? Response, oh, sorry. Moving so fast, I lost the F. Let's just see if our get call works. We can try that on the command line. And what we'll also do here is we'll just add a quick log just so I know life is good. Print line, listening on 3000. All right, let's kill our server again. Let's build it. Let's hack. There it is, listening on 3000. Let's make sure at least our bill endpoint is working on that. So we'll do localhost 3000 bill. And okay, we got our status okay, but the city name obviously is empty, and we got that. So actually, I forgot to put a return in here, didn't I? I forgot to put a return. So the post call will come through that, and then we just had our return there, right? But at least we now have this endpoint working here, right? We got that response back. What we now need is to get this to work with our post call. Now, how can we validate our post call? We're probably going to have to do that in curl. So let's see if I have already in curl something that we can play with that will be post. I'll probably have to play with these. This could be interesting here. So let me see if we did. Oh, but then I got to send the data, and I need something with the data. I should have something with data in it. Oh, there it is. So let's see if this just works for me. We can test that as well. So 3000 is going to be a post. And what we said here as well is now the input is city name. And that should be Miami. And it says page not found because I probably have to do, I just got to do localhost here. We'll try it again. Unless it's not running. Did I shut it down? Let me see if I shut it down. No, it's not shutting down. And we're still running localhost 3000 bill. And on our curl command, did I put /bill? No. Sorry. Thank you. I wasn't looking at the comments. I love pair programming, and I thank everybody for helping me. Boom. Look at that. We actually have an endpoint that is working on /bill on the post with city name. How excited are you? I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited. Okay, so what does all that mean? This is what it means. We're going to take a 10-minute break because we need it. It's been a little too long. Let me look at you here. We're going to take a 10-minute break. I don't know if Manish is still there. We don't have any other questions, which is excellent. I hope you've been bearing with me as I hack our little web service. You see what I've been doing, Manish? Man, I am on the fly. I am on the edge, man. I hacked out a little web service so we can try a custom query command with the HTTP. Everybody's on the edge of their seat, wondering what's going to happen. I've been getting some help from people too. So we're going to take a 10-minute break again. I don't see any questions. If anybody has any other questions right now for Manish, that's fair. If not, we can take
There is a comment about you. You are the god of demos.
only if it works. Only works. I had no idea we were going to do this tonight, but I thought about it. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. I'm going to catch my breath. When we get back, we're going to see if Dgraph can talk to that service I just wrote and get back that response. And now you just saw how we can do a custom GraphQL to our layer 3, to that other service that's kind of running behind it. So I just saw a question come in. If we have a GraphQL schema and a Go struct, how do we maintain both? I'll talk about that. Again, I think you should do it manually. I think you should look at this Go code that I have because I think it's a good practice there. I think you should stay away from code gen. I honestly do that. It's always hurt me in the end for debugging and maintaining the code. I know it's easy to do. It's not easy to understand. I just think it's tedious and it's something that you just got to kind of do yourself. Look at that travel project to see how I'm maintaining SQL queries and the response types and how I'm doing that. It's one strategy that works for me. All right, let me put the 10 minutes on the board. Countdown, reset, 10, start. All right, I'll see everybody again in 10 minutes. All right, we're gonna do this last hour or so. We may not get all the way to my 8:30 time, but let's just at least spend another half an hour or so together here. Couple questions that came in. This custom query I'm doing is specific to Dgraph. I can't say that other systems support this. They might, but this is very specific to Dgraph, okay? Also, I need you guys to remember something about what we're talking about with these, the GraphQL and Go types. The reality is that there's very little Go code other than maybe some data import stuff that I'm doing that even requires the types. The majority of what I'm trying to share with you is that, where am I here? Let's get over to VS Code. Is that, remember, your front end is doing a lot of GraphQL too. If you go under in the project app, travel UI assets, you're going to see a query.js script. Do you see how the browser is the one executing all these scripts again, or these queries against the database? None of this is really going through Go code. So you can think about how you're going to translate queries to Go structs, but then you also have to think about how you're going to translate that to JavaScript, and how you're going to do that to this, and how you're going to do that to that. So again, I try really hard not to do this code generation. I try really hard to lay these queries out. So if there's bugs or problems, they're right here. And it is so much easier to manage and debug. I focus, after 30+ years of development, on being able to maintain code, but to be able to make sure that that code is debuggable. And that when there's problems in production, I can manage it. The minimal amount of disruption to the code base that I know is working. So again, under travel UI scripts, you'll see how I'm also executing GraphQL in JavaScript against the Dgraph server. Okay, so let's get back to where we were. I want to add this custom query on port 3000 to Bill. It's a post. It takes a city name. We just tested the call, so we know it's there and we know it works. Now it's a matter of Dgraph being able to call it. Now, what I don't know off the top of my head is, will our Dgraph service running in our compose environment be able to access this service? We may have to run our service inside of our, we may have to make a quick change here and run that service inside, let's go to Zarf, our compose environment so we can access it. Because I don't know if we can access anything on the outside directly. I don't off the top of my head remember if that's it. If somebody knows, we're going to be fine now. So I'm going to try it first. But if our Dgraph service can access the local network here, we'll just add it. We'll add our service to compose, and we'll just deal with it that way. So let's just try it first. But the very first thing we have to at least do is update the type system. Now, one of the nice things about Dgraph when it comes to migrations is that if you notice, this was called update to begin with. It wasn't add. Oh yeah, probably if we bind 0000. So I love that idea. Let's do that too. Oops, let's bring up our, right, all right, let me get rid of service for a second. Oh yeah, I put it here. Let's do that. Let's bind 000, and then if it doesn't work, I can always add it to compose. It's not a problem. It would help if I did this in our logging, wouldn't it? If it doesn't work, then it's all good. Let's just double check that. Hack, Control C, build it. Come on. Hack. Let's make sure curl command works. Okay, so that still worked on 00000. Docker run d net equals host. Oh, we can do that too, huh? Yeah, I don't know enough here to do that quickly on the Docker compose either, but let's just see what happens. Worst case, I'll add it to the DB only really quickly, right? Like that's not a hard lift. But at least at this point now, I bound it to 0, 0, 0, 0. So we'll see what happens. Okay, we got bigger fish to fry right now. We've got to update or migrate our schema. Now, here's the cool thing about Dgraph. We can update this schema all the time, and it will take the time to update it and re-index the things that it has to index. The other cool thing is that there are times where you might change some types out. You might have an int, now you want it to be a string. If you make type changes and those type changes are compatible, then what's nice is that the Dgraph can handle those type changes for you. You don't have to worry about anything. I'm going to have Manish talk more about that before we're done. But I think there's real power in the way that Dgraph handles schema changes for you, especially if there's compatibility, if you're changing some type information. Okay, with all that said, let's make sure that this gets saved in our schema anyway. So we're going to add a new custom command called bill city. Takes a city name, it's a bill response, it's a custom query, and it performs this HTTP call. So let me hit send. It looks like that was successful. Let me also do something here. Let me kill our GraphQL playground. And let me just bring it back up just to make sure that that's part of the type again. So HTTP, this is the worst part with the schemas, but localhost 8080/GraphQL. Here we are. Give me the schema. Let me copy that into our little project here so I can see it. There it is. And let's do a type query. Ooh, look at this. So we know that it was absolutely saved, right? We now have a bill city command under query that takes the city name and the response. Ooh, we're getting excited, getting excited. So now the thing is we want to execute this query, right? So let's see if this will work without us having to do any extra networking here. Let's take our, I don't know, let's take our, we'll just duplicate this get city maybe. Duplicate it. We're going to call this, Bill, what do I call this? Bill city. Let's see what happens. Create. We know it's a query. We know it's a bill city. We know we need a name. Oh, no, we need a city name. And the city name, it doesn't really matter. We're just going to say it's Miami. And we know that it brings back a bill response. Okay. And the bill response, again, is the city name and a message. Oops. So if our networking is in place, which I hope it is, then we should be able to get back that response and not get some 400. So obviously, it looks like it can't talk to the service without it running in our Docker environment, which is a bummer because now what we're going to have to do is get it into Docker real quick and then redo our schema and just seed a couple of values. No problem. We can do this all fairly quickly, but we could at least see that it tried to go out there, right? So at least for me, the fastest way for me to be able to do this is I'll just kind of steal compose here. Let me just steal like this right here. And let me just go into my DB only. We'll just run it here. It's not a big deal. Totally not a big deal. And we'll just call this our hack. There it is. And now we got to containerize it. Oh man, this is a bummer. I don't want to go through all this stuff. So if somebody can think of how we can get that out to the network, I didn't think this through that far. That would be good. Is there a way to do that when we run? That's a bummer, but I don't want to waste time on this. So yeah, that's a bummer. I'm going to cancel this back. Okay, I don't want to start creating images. Okay, host Docker internal 3000. Oh, as the endpoint. for the schema. Oh, I didn't even know that. So you're saying this should be, I didn't even know this existed. Host Docker internal. That should give us access from inside the container. I'm willing to try it, dude. Let's see. Why don't you host IP? Yeah, you know, my networking foo isn't the strongest out there. So I do apologize for that. But let's see if this works based on what my friend just said. So if not, we'll move on, unfortunately. But we'll see here. Oh, that worked. You are a genius, my friend. Now I've learned something new. That is brilliant. Look what happened. We just executed our little hacky endpoint. Well, I got to remember this host Docker internal thing. We just executed our endpoint against that running service, and we just got this back. Oh man, how cool is that? This just kind of worked really quickly out of the box. Yep, thank you for showing up. It's all good. So now we know how we can write custom queries that can make these HTTP calls to the services that we're writing, right? What I just did, if we go, oh, I took Lucid Mode off, is now I just had the database in layer 2 call a service on layer 3. That was so cool. And now having that host Docker internal got us all the way out. This is really, really, really brilliant stuff. And so this lets you now have a clean DSL GraphQL from your UIs and everything go through that one interface, that one Dgraph endpoint there with GraphQL. And now you can extend your API altogether. Now, what's also cool is, and what's coming also, if I just go back to our schema for a second, let's go back to our actual schema, Mr. Kennedy, business data schema here. A couple more things. You can see here in the schema in the project, I'm playing with another custom command, but this one is called DQL. DQL is the Dgraph Query Language, and it provides extended support beyond what GraphQL can do with a graph database. Today, at least in the master version of code service I'm using, it lets you update or perform DQL queries. One of the things I'm trying to play with is to be able to use DQL to also do mutations. And so what's coming soon is going to be the ability to have a custom mutation. Just as a really quick view here, what this mutation is attempting to do is apply what's called facets to the database. In other words, we can have a user, right? And we can have a place. And then I want to say is that user, let me do it this way, because if I just talk about it, it's not going to matter. I've been wanting to play with this idea of facets, but facets only work in DQL. We don't have the GraphQL support. This is where a custom mutation is going to have to come in. So, and I just learned about facets. I thought they were fascinating. Let's say we've got a user here. Right? And we've got multiple users and we have a place, right? We've got users and we have place. And again, there could be multiple places and there could be multiple users. One of the things that I want to do that I'm playing with here is the idea that, okay, maybe this user went to this place and what it wants to do is say whether the place was good or not, right? The idea of a facet is to be able to apply data on that edge. So this user says the place is good, but this user says the place maybe is bad for any reason, right? And what's nice is these aren't fields in some node. This isn't another lookup table that takes a user ID and a place ID and applies this kind of attribute of good or bad. We can put the data directly on the edge. and then query also against that edge for this thing that's called a facet. But right now, GraphQL syntax doesn't support these facets. DQL does. So when we're able to write I was trying to sneak this into a custom query, but it's not going to work because of the response side of things. But this is coming soon. So what this thing is, the idea of this custom DQL is going to be, is I can give it an email for a user and a place and give me how many stars it was. I can look up the unique IDs for that user's email and the place. And then I can apply this facet data in this RDF format. I think it's called RDF. And now suddenly I have this. So we can only do this in DQL. We can execute DQL in a custom command, again, expanding your API. And very soon we'll be able to do this for type mutation as well. And then you'll be able to leverage the full power of DQL when you need it, still behind a GraphQL API that everybody can access. It's amazing. All right, I'm going to share one more thing with you tonight. I know we could have gone to 8:30. I don't need to hold you here till 8:30. I've shown you a lot, but I do want to show you one more thing that this project does use so you can kind of see it. Notice the user type that I have here. There's some extended sort of configuration here for the user, and that's this auth directive. Now, what this auth directive does is it allows us to apply authentication rules to the different operations that are going to exist for this user type. So if a query is trying to be performed, then we expect that the person making this query has the role of admin, let's say, or maybe the role of user, or they have a role of admin or user. But if they're doing an ad, they can only be admins. So this is applying security against the different operations that we have. Now, for this to work, we've got to do a couple of things. We do have to apply some roles, but more importantly, this all works off of JSON Web Tokens. So what you're going to find in the bottom of the schema is this comment called Dgraph authorization. And you can see here that we define which header in the HTTP request we're going to be putting our JSON Web Token in. We're going to define the namespace for the document that will have the token in it. We're going to define the algorithm, and the verification key ends up being the public key. And in this code here, this is a Go template, so it all gets filled in. So if you want to play with command level authentication in Dgraph, then this project is already set up. And you can see how you can apply even programming logic here for your JSON Web Token claims. Okay, I'm not going to run this stuff right now. I want you to know there it's working. The other ACL kind of stuff that we talked about, I haven't integrated any of that yet. A lot of it's integrated into Slash already, and they already have UIs. And so if you're doing this stuff in Slash, that stuff will again be able to override some of this stuff here. So you have UIs to be able to do this in Slash. You're also seeing how we can apply it in the schema. Now, I know you want me to talk about lambdas. I'm not a node developer, so I haven't been able to play with them directly. Dgraph does have a couple of talks out there for lambdas. I don't know, Manish, if you have links for that last talk that I was a part of last week where they were showing the lambda stuff.
I think we can find the links and send it over to people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it something specific that they? Okay, so I think the question is like, will there be support for Go in lambdas? So right now what we're doing is we are reworking the lambdas because Dgraph now supports multi-tenancy. And so we want to make sure the lambdas would work with multi-tenant system as well. So we almost like going to rewrite how lambdas execute. And with the new system, it would run not just JavaScript, it would run Go, Java, Python, Perl, it would run like lots of languages. So with that, you won't be limited to any particular language.
But what's nice right now, because I'm not a node person and I don't want to set up node, I just showed you how to write a custom query. That custom query is, from my brain, really no different than a Lambda, right? Like that HTTP call could have went to AWS Lambdas. They could have went anywhere, and then you could have had the response mapped back. So just remember though, even though you don't have a Lambda or a cloud function running locally, which is what the Lambdas that Manish is talking about there, right? So there's a little less latency there because you're on the same network and the same thing there for the database. So I agree with that. You could still at least even start with going out. It all depends on that latency cost in doing that. But you know, we're not really worried about that kind of latency there. Manish has done such an amazing job making sure that when you have the right indexes in place, querying large data sets is so fast that whatever little latencies we're having there in the network, it's all going to compensate. I think you're going to be really happy with the performance of the database. So you have access to that. Okay, here's the reality. It's almost 8 o'clock and I've shared a lot with you. And you have this great project out there now that you can steal from and hack from. And you've gotten to see a lot of the goodness of Dgraph and how to get started. I even hacked some custom API, which I can't believe worked, but you know, that's cool. So a couple things here before I close this workshop up. To get access to me, well, let me do this. Let me bring up another project here, my Go training project. I'm really bad at introducing myself and that kind of stuff. There's never really enough time anyway. But here's some good information. If you want to get in touch with me, email is the best. Just send me an email, reach out. If you have a question, you can't find some information, you're stuck, reach out to me. I will do my best to get you answers. This is me on Twitter. And as I already showed you, the project that we've been looking at is right here under dgraph.io/travel. This is our starter kit for you to get going on building both front-end UIs in the browser and Go stuff with everything that I've talked about. I'm constantly updating this project as new features come out to try to incorporate everything, all the goodness that Dgraph can do. I'm a little bit behind on some of it, but if you're looking for an open source project where you can contribute and gives you the ability to learn Dgraph and stuff like that, this could be a great project for you because there are things that I want to do that I don't have time. You could potentially code it. We could do those code reviews. We'll get to talk to Dgraph engineers when we get stuck. And then we're helping everybody in the Dgraph and GraphQL ecosystem by giving them starter kit code that will let them get up and running very, very quickly. That's the whole goal of that project. So you know how to gain access to me. You know how to gain access to Dgraph. We put some links out there. This is everything that I wanted to share with you tonight. I see another question here. When edges get modified or nodes get moved, how does the versioning happen to reapply business rules? I'm not sure I can answer that. If you're talking about, actually, I'm not even really sure what you're asking there.
Yeah, actually, I'm not.
You know what I wanted you to talk about real quick? I was telling them how powerful your schema changes are, even like when you're changing types and all of that, and how powerful that, like you don't need a migration system like you do with your SQL servers. Dgraph's already built it. You just change your schema. And as long as those types that you're changing are compatible, Dgraph can do that. And I think I remember from one of the talks, Manish, that old data nodes maintain their old type system and the conversions are kind of done on the front end. So maybe you can just give people a little bit about how powerful that schema stuff is that you do.
Yeah, so I think the in traditional databases, what happens is the storage of the data and the schema that you set is very much tied together. So when you change data type from, let's say, an int to a string or a string to an int, you have to go back and do a data migration because the database only knows one thing. With Dgraph, we have two levels of schema. So we have the the high level schema, which is what user sees. And then internally, we also store the data type along with the data. So what we call the storage type. So we have the schema type and we have storage type. And so when you change from an int to a string, and if things are stored as int, they would stay stored as ints, and we can identify them. And what we'll do is, if you query them at the runtime, we can just convert them to string and send it back to you. And vice versa, if you convert from a string to an int, same thing happens. And as the new data comes in, it will be verified against whatever schema that you have set, whether it's int or a string. It will be verified against that, so we can reject it in case it doesn't match up. But if it does, the new data gets stored in the new format. And Dgraph is smart enough to identify the old format and the new format. And also, you can, if you need to do indices, for example, you had an int, you need to make it a string and then add some full text index and stuff. That can all be done without having to migrate your old data.
Yeah, it's brilliant stuff, really brilliant stuff. And they've improved the performance of schema updates and indexing with every release too. It's a big part. Like, a lot of databases ignore that part. Like, they put it on everybody else. Dgraph said, no, this stuff is too important. We're going to do it here. All right, somebody asked for my contact information again. I think I closed that. So let me do it again. Open up my training repo. This is on github.com, Ardan Labs. Training, that's my information again. Take a look at it. Email address, Twitter. I'm also on the Go for Slack. So if you are doing more Go related stuff, you want to do this invite, Slack, Go Bridge, all of that. Encryption at rest is in the roadmap for Dgraph Cloud as well. Manish, one other thing. How do I find your roadmap? Because that's in the discuss, right?
Yeah, it's in the discuss. So let me find the link. So if you just search for roadmap.
I think I asked them to write a roadmap.dgraph.io.
Oh, is that? Oh, that also redirects?
Yeah, I asked them to do that. So if you go to roadmap.
Even I didn't know that.
when you were doing that conference, when you were doing your last talk, I had said it, and Daniel came in and I said, it would be nice to have roadmap. So if you go to roadmap.dgraph.io, you'll see the, why didn't that grow bigger? You'll see the Dgraph product roadmap for this year. Dgraph is really good at trying to stay very transparent about what they're doing and what they're working on. So you'll see the things that are happening here. It's the ACL enterprise features there, some GraphQL stuff here. I'm really looking for, Manish, what I really want is custom mutations, man. So I can do DQL stuff with facets. That's what I want. So if you go on this page, you kind of see the roadmap here and where they are. It's really, really nice. Roadmap.dgraph.io. And then I never remember this is discuss.dgraph.io. And this is where you can ask your questions and gain access to engineers. And everything is then historical there, so we can search it. Does anyone have a link for the workshop survey? Oh yeah, there's going to be a survey here, isn't there? Oh, they were telling me about the survey.
I think Zenny might have that, but let me ping her separately.
Yeah, I think they're going to send you the survey, and I was asked to remind you to do the survey, give that feedback, let everybody know what you thought about the workshop and things, and tell us how we can improve. Again, I'm really dynamic when I do these things. I don't set too much of a plan. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. And if that didn't work for you, that's fair. Let everybody know. But yeah, I think it will come up once we kill this Zoom. So I guess startups are quite quick at adopting new tech. How's your experience selling it to legacy? I'm working with several clients right now who are starting some new projects, who have a lot of experience with relational and NoSQL databases, and they're all moving to GraphQL and Dgraph. And they're loving what they're experiencing. Is everything obvious to them? No, it's engineering. We've got to fight through it. But once they start to see how beautiful, how quickly they can move with a type-based schema and how they can solve generalized problems with it as well, they're not looking back. And they love the idea of Dgraph being in layer 2. They love that they get that CRUD API. Everything goes through Dgraph. They can extend what they need with those custom APIs. And then they love the idea that all that will run in Slash too. So they don't have to manage their own production environments. It's win, 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 win. And then we have one client that we're working with who's leveraging Apollo Federation. So Dgraph has been doing a lot of work to have plugins. So if Dgraph is not the main source of your data, but a part of that data, it will work in a federated environment like Apollo as well. Which again is brilliant, right? Because Apollo now is at layer 2. You're talking through Apollo, which can talk through Dgraph, and you're getting the same wins, but you can have a more global extended schema. I think this is the world. I think this is beyond the future. We're here already. I think GraphQL is the new DSL. I say it all the time. I think it's the new DSL. And a database is just one type of storage at this point. And Dgraph is kind of leading the way for that. And I know I don't work at Dgraph, and I know it feels like I'm selling it. I'm just really excited about this tech and all the things that I can build and how quickly I can build it. I'm just excited about it. That's why I'm here. Okay.
I'm glad that you like it. I mean, we haven't done anything to build to like make him say all these things, but I think for me, it's just really amazing that Bill is excited about Dgraph and you know, thinks highly of the tech. So that just like makes us really happy.
Yeah, the engineers that Manish has are just world-class engineers. They really focus on integrity and stuff. And that also makes me feel much more comfortable even recommending everybody look at this database. So, you know what, mention one thing, because what we don't have sometimes is that atomic, how atomic the database is. For a database that runs in Kubernetes and is highly distributed, right? And a Kubernetes environment isn't necessarily a stable one. When we think about needing atomic instructions, we think relational database. We're stuck there, right? Because even our NoSQL databases with sharding had a problem. So maybe in like 2 minutes, you can just quickly tell people how you achieved the high level, letting this database be atomic for these types of because in DQL, you have the concept of a transaction, a rollback, and a commit. Maybe you can spend 2 minutes on there.
Yeah, so Dgraph is quite inspired by the research that Google had done around Spanner, and the D in Dgraph stands for distributed. So we had to build a distributed system, but then we worked really hard on adding distributed ACID transactions into Dgraph as well. And over the last few years, we have really perfected that, right? So I think part of what makes Dgraph hard is that it's also replicated, right? So each shard in Dgraph is also it could be 3x replicated, and so you can lose any of the machines, and the system would still continue to run and would still give you the guarantees of transactions. And this was Jepsen tested, like a few years ago. The guarantees that Dgraph provides are really strong. In terms of Kubernetes, we actually had to do a bunch of work to make it really work with Kubernetes, because the thing about Kubernetes is that it can kill the instance at any point of time and then kind of move it. And that means that, the database has to be able to never give up on any of the rights that it has accepted so far via commits, and it should not lose any of that. And Dgraph, over time, we have sort of really made sure that all the really crazy edge cases that distributed system throws at you, we have sort of resolved all of those. So Dgraph is truly it's a very unique system, particularly in this in the whole distributed database world. Yeah.
I dropped that Jepsen link. I don't know if that's the latest work they did, that 1.1.1.
It does sound like that's the one in last year. Yep, that's the latest one. Yeah.
If you're considering or worried about the integrity of the database and stuff, read that report, because one cool thing that Dgraph did is they said they're not going to hide behind their tech. They had Jepsen go and really beat it up. And Jepsen found things and they fixed them. But if you don't do that kind of stuff, you can't have the level of integrity that they have. So to me, that's a selling point, that document right there. Somebody's asking, what is the difference between Slash and Dgraph Cloud? Isn't slash and Dgraph Cloud, same thing?
It's the same. I think, in fact, we are renaming slash GraphQL to just shared instances in Dgraph Cloud. I think to give you some of the history over there, initially when we were going with GraphQL, we were thinking that the only GraphQL people would be attracted to that kind of offering, and DQL would be a different kind of crowd. But as we started to get more GraphQL people come in, they really wanted the power of DQL because DQL just allows you to do so much more. And it actually makes GraphQL really kind of makes it more enjoyable as well, because you don't lose out on any of the power. So we started to see people actually wanting to run DQL alongside GraphQL, and Dgraph Cloud was initially meant to just be for DQL, but then we decided, hey, how best can we merge the two worlds? And so now slash GraphQL, I think tomorrow in the keynote, I'll be announcing that is being sort of rebranded to Dgraph Cloud. And Dgraph Cloud will just have 3 tiers, which is free, shared, and dedicated. And so slash GraphQL, which we had before, is essentially a shared instance of Dgraph Cloud.
Nice, nice. I think one of the biggest wins was giving me the ability to write DQL under that GraphQL command.
Yeah, and I think a bunch of work that we're doing in the interface as well, it shows you how the GraphQL data types and stuff map to DQL schema. So you can actually exactly what to query and how and so on and so forth. And we are adding more and more ways by which this overlap between DQL and GraphQL becomes really simple and really clean, because we see people who are very used to the graph world come in and they want GraphQL, and people who are very used to GraphQL come in and they want DQL. And so it's best to kind of unite the two.
Yeah, just the facets alone, which I'm dying to play with, right? I need the DQL there.
Right.
So I'll be adding all this stuff throughout the year. And again, if you're looking for an open source project, you want to learn Dgraph and GraphQL and DQL, and you want to learn these things, there's work to do in this project that gives everybody the ability to not have to do the hard work initially like we're doing, trying to learn all this stuff, but it gives somebody a great starting point. Yeah, and the facets is really a cool concept. Okay, it is 8 o'clock. So we're going to end this workshop right now. You know how to get in touch with me. I'll just put that up one more time since we're here. Where is that information? Right here. So you know how to get in touch with me. Take a picture of that. 3, 2, 1, gone. And I'm going to stop this workshop. Okay, so thank you. We had a lot of people stay on for 2.5, 3 hours. So that's 3.5 hours, I think. So that's pretty amazing. All right.
There's some people here which for whom it's 2 a.m. in the morning. I think I saw a message. So yeah, really thanks. Thank you everyone for staying back. And I do want to thank on their behalf. Thank you, Bill, for this just amazing. I mean, I think it matched all the expectations that I had from the workshop that you run. It's all of that and beyond. So thank you for all that education there.
Well, I do definitely appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, I'm hitting the stop button and we're out.